It being 11:07, the House will now proceed to the consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order paper.
Private members' business, affaires émanant des députés, prise en considération à l'étape du rapport.
Consideration at report stage of C-215, an act to amend the Employment Insurance Act, illness, injury, or quarantine. Mr. Gould's bill.
À l'étape du rapport.
There is no motion at report stage, so the House will now proceed without debate to the taking of voices of debate on report stage. Mr. Gould, seconded by Mr. Lehoux, moves that Bill C-215, an act to amend the Employment Insurance Act, illness, injury, or quarantine, be concurred in at report stage if the member of a recognized party present in the House wishes that the motion be adopted or carried on division, or wishes to request a recorded division. I would invite them to rise and indicate it to the chair.
Of the governing party.
Deputy House Leader.
Deputy House Leader, I'm sorry.
I request be carried on division.
Okay. Agreed? Agreed. I therefore declare the motion carried on division. When shall the bill be read a third time? Now? Now. Before the House proceeds to the debate at third reading, the Chair wishes to remind members that pursuant to the statement made on Tuesday, April 3rd, 2022, a royal recommendation is required for Bill C-215, an act to amend the Employment Insurance Act, illness, injury, and quarantine, since the bill appropriates part of the public revenue, à moins qu'un préavis.
Unless 24-hour notice of such a royal recommendation is given prior to the conclusion of the debate on Bill C-215, the question will not be put on the motion for third reading of this bill.
Monsieur Gould, appuyé par Monsieur.
Mr. Gould, seconded by Mr. Lehoux, moves that Bill C-215, an act to amend the Employment Insurance Act, illness, injury, or quarantine, be now read a third time and do pass. Debate. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. C'est un honneur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an honor for me to speak to my private member's bill at third reading. Bill C-215 would change the number of weeks for health benefits under EI. As lawmakers, we need to be ethical, practical, and responsible in the decisions we make and the policy choices we make every day. It's this sense of duty that we need to keep in mind for the greater good of our communities. And in that spirit, I would like to remind my Liberal colleagues and the Prime Minister of the importance of our work, because C-15 is still awaiting royal recommendation. Now, C-15 would increase from 15 to 52 weeks the amount of weeks for sickness benefits that Canadians can use. So they would have these extra weeks to recover after illness. This would offer a bare minimum of financial security in the event of serious illnesses, such as cancer and other illnesses which require a long recovery period. Since the last reading of the bill, Mr. Speaker, the bill was studied by the HUMA committee, and the report was voted for. It was supported by all committee members on October 19th. Moreover, all of our hard work has led to a half victory because on November 25th, the Liberal government gave some glimmer of hope to sick Canadians who will apply for benefits starting on December 18th. They will have access to 26 weeks of sickness benefits under EI rather than 15 weeks. 26 is, of course, better than 15, but this isn't a huge consolation for Canadians who are ill, who have to survive and recover during these difficult times, made even more difficult by inflation. We know, though, that in most cases, 38 to 40 weeks are necessary for recovering full health after serious illness. So, Mr. Speaker, 26 weeks is a start, but it's really not enough. It doesn't do justice to the spirit of EI. That EI is now, in fact, outdated, and experts say that we're not meeting people's real needs. Experts say that people need 52 weeks to make a full recovery after serious illness. They need almost a year. As you know, Mr. Speaker, we are tabling this bill, but various iterations of this bill have been tabled in the past in order to address the issues of the outdated 1971 version. But here we are now. It's almost 2023. And as I was saying earlier, Mr. Speaker, this bill absolutely needs the Liberal government's support in order to obtain royal recommendation and in order to become a reality. But thus far, everything the Liberals have said and done gives me the impression that they are going to let down 31,000 sick Canadians, let them down, and they won't have enough money to recover, to become strong and healthy again after the 26 weeks which were promised to them, which were promised in the June 2021 budget. Now, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that I do not at all understand the government's refusal to support this bill because this bill is responsible and fair for all Canadians who don't have insurance or group insurance. The government did partially recognize the very important needs on the ground. That makes me happy. So they did increase the maximum to 26 weeks for sickness benefits. But what's interesting is that most of the spending is for the 26 weeks, not for weeks beyond that. And we'll see more about that. Now, there are three key words about this bill, Mr. Speaker: affordable, reasonable, and shared. Let me explain. In a 2019 study, whose results were reconfirmed in March of this year by the PBO, it was demonstrated that this bill would be affordable for Canada, it's a reasonable cost for the government, and that the costs are shared between Canadians and employers in Canada. And as I said in the House during second reading, the March 2022 study showed that 151,000 Canadians a year need over 15 weeks of sickness benefits in order to recover. And if, let's say, all 151,000 of these Canadians used all their weeks, then the total cost would be $1.6 billion a year on average for the next 5 years. Mr. Speaker, I testified before the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills Development, Social Development, and Status of Persons with Disabilities. I testified on October 17th and 19th this fall. And I was able to present my bill and to demonstrate all of its merit, which is undeniable and indisputable to all except, apparently, my Liberal colleagues and the Prime Minister. During the many hours of study in committee, many witnesses testified and gave very touching testimony. For some of them, they were able to share with us their medical expertise or administrative bureaucratic expertise. On October 19th, the committee heard from Benoit Cadieux. He's the Director of Special Benefits and EI Policy at the Skills and Employment Branch at ESTC. According to Benoit Cadieux, the estimated cost for the next federal budget would be $1 billion a year to go from 15 up to 26 weeks. Also, In the cost assessment of Bill C-215, done by the Parliamentary Budget Officer in March of this year, it is stated that the cost of Bill C-215, which would increase the sickness insurance benefits from 15 to 52 weeks, it would cost $1.092 billion a year. This means, thus, that the additional cost of going from 26 weeks up to 52 weeks would be $92 million a year in order to help all those who need these sickness benefits. This is absolutely an affordable expenditure to protect 31,000 Canadians who are uninsured and need more than 26 weeks to recover from serious illness. Mr. Speaker, all of us here who are in good health, we are exceptionally fortunate, and too often we take this for granted. For many people experience cancer, and for some people, sickness and recovery lasts a long time and may last even longer if the person has additional burdens and struggles. Because, as we know, medical problems are just a part of living with cancer. One also has to deal with a lot of transition and adaptation after treatment. And in these times of recovery, there are a lot of challenges and problems, more than what people expect until they get to that stage. Mr. Speaker, I feel that we absolutely need to support Canadians through illness and through recovery. Recovery is a very difficult time. During recovery, many people have to rethink their lives and everything about their lives, and that takes a lot of courage and a lot of resilience. Canadians need us. They need our help. So I hope with all my heart that this third hour of debate will make the Liberal government realize that they need to offer Canadians what they deserve. And what they deserve is for us to give them all the right conditions for them to recover as well as possible by having financial support. In Canada, we're fortunate because we have a healthcare system that gives us free hospital services. But there are a number of additional expenditures that we need to take into account. And, I experienced this all with my wife. For example, there are other costs such as transportation and parking when you go to treatment, babysitting costs for many people. There are costs to purchase nutritional supplements or vitamins, medication, and even equipment that you might need during recovery. Today, EI sickness benefits offer up to 15 weeks of financial support for those who can't work for medical reasons. And these individuals can also receive up to 55% of their salary to a maximum of $595 a week. I think Canadians would agree that increasing this to 26 weeks is not enough and that we can do more. I'd like to conclude, Mr. Speaker, by restating all of the strong aspects of Bill C-215. All those who are experts in the field feel that we should increase EI sickness benefits from 15 to 50 weeks. This bill suggests increasing it to 52 weeks, a full year. It's our duty as lawmakers to give the most vulnerable a solid safety net. This bill is related to 55% of Canadians. That is, those who don't have group insurance and those who work mainly in the goods and services sector. The EI program has oversight and audit mechanisms built in, which ensures that people don't take advantage of the system and avoids fraud and mistakes. Also, medical certificates demonstrate how many weeks people need in order to recover when they make a claim for sickness benefits. The Conservative Party had this in their campaign platform in 2021. We promised this to Canadians. And also, this measure is affordable and reasonable if you consider the cost that small and medium businesses have to pay to private insurances which offer the same benefits. As of December 18th, the Liberal government is going to increase to 26 weeks the number of weeks of sickness benefits. But according to cost estimates done by the PBO, it would just cost $92 million additional dollars a year to go from 26 weeks to 52 weeks. So we can afford it. So the only thing that's missing, Mr. Speaker, is liberal will. I truly hope with all my heart that in order to help all those who need our help, I hope that C-215 will obtain the royal recommendation of the Prime Minister or of the Finance Minister, as well as the support of all members in this House at third reading. This is a worthy cause. This would give the people we love the ability to take the time they need to take care of themselves and fully recover. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to take this occasion to wish you happy holidays. Happy holidays to all of you. Happy holidays to Canadians, especially those who live in the wonderful riding of Lévis-Lotbinière. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The honourable member for Malpeque with a question, or are you getting ready to speak next? Okay, we'll go to questions and questions et commentaires. The honourable member for... see, this is what happens on a Monday morning. You kind of forget what's going on. Port Moody, Coquitlam, Port Moody, Port Moody, Coquitlam. There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the members so much for the speech, and I thank the members so much for the advocacy, and I enjoyed listening to testimony, and I appreciated the opportunity to have testimony in retail and wholesale trade. So I wonder if the member could just expand a little bit on why this is so important for those workers.
The Deputy de Lévis-Lotbinière.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question, which is an important one. Unfortunately, people working in the retail sector don't have employer-covered EI for that period, and these are people who have some lower salaries, and they are deeply affected when they have a serious illness after the 15-week period, or 626 shortly. And so they just don't have the income necessary to fully recover and convalesce. This is very important. It affects thousands and thousands of Canadians.
Commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable député de Thérèse de Blainville.
The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. I'd like to thank my colleague for Lévis-Lotbinière. My question is the following. We sit on the HUMA committee, and recently we heard yet again from witnesses like Marie-Hélène Dubé, who not only has had a serious illness, but has also been fighting to make the illness benefits go from 15 to 52 weeks. And we heard from other witnesses as well, who, in addition to struggling with an illness, also have to deal with financial considerations. And unfortunately, in some cases, these people were forced to give up the fight, both against the illness and for these changes. What can we do here and convince the Liberal government to take action in order to finally help these people? People who, like Madame Dubé and others, are fighting to get the care they need. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her excellent question. As parliamentarians in this House, we have all heard stories about Canadians in our ridings who needed more time with EI sickness benefits. That said, and this could perhaps convince the Liberal government, at committee, we heard from an official at a department who said that it would take $1 billion for 26 weeks, and that it would take 92 million to make it go to 52 weeks, which added to 1 billion just makes 1.1 billion. So it's not that much more money. And if we don't move the threshold 52, that means that 31,000 Canadians won't get the help they need. So it's worth it for the Liberal Party to take that into consideration.
Honorable député de Beauce.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for tabling this important legislation. My colleague had a personal experience which made an impact on him. And so, I'd like my colleague to talk about what that support could have meant in that situation, a situation that affects many Canadians. The Honourable Member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague. He knows me well and he knows my story. With great humility, I may say that I might not be there today if I hadn't been through what I went through with my spouse. We did not get support from the government, but we did get a lot of support from our loved ones and community in order to get through that difficult period. And so I want to give back for the rest of my life what society gave to me in that situation. This bill, I know that it will help hundreds of thousands of families in the generations to come. It took us 50 years to modernize EI illness benefits, and we should not miss the boat for the next 50 years.
Continuing debate, the Honourable Member for Malpeque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to participate in this debate on Bill C-215, as sponsored by the member from Lévis-Laterbernère, which is about amending the Employment Insurance Act in the area of illness, injury, and quarantine. This bill would modify existing legislation to extend EI sickness benefits from 15 to 52 weeks. Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear from the outset. The Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion opposes this bill. The Government of Canada opposes this bill. I also want to be clear that Parliament has already approved an extension of EI sickness benefits to 26 weeks. These changes are being implemented as we speak, and as was recently announced, they will be up and running beginning December 18th. Additionally, the legislative changes related to this extension have already received royal assent. Therefore, I'll be using my time today to explain our position and outline how our changes to Canada's EI program will help support Canadian workers. Mr. Speaker, let there be no doubt. We recognize the financial challenges that Canadians suffer from long-term illness or injury and their families face. We know that EI sickness benefits are an important support for Canadians who need temporarily leave from their job due to illness, injury, or quarantine. These benefits allow individuals to take the time they need to rest and restore their health without having to worry about their financial situation. While the current 15 weeks of entitlement are sufficient for most claimants to recover and return to work, approximately 1/3 of claimants exhaust the maximum entitlement of 15 weeks of benefits. This is why we are permanently extending the maximum duration of EI sickness benefits from 15 weeks to 26 weeks. This extension will provide an additional support to approximately 169,000 Canadian workers every year who require additional time to regain their health before returning to work. In contrast, an extension of EI sickness benefits from 15 to 52 weeks, as proposed in Bill C-215, would undermine the spirit and the intent of the EI program, which is to keep workers connected to the labour force. Bill C-215 would incur an estimated incremental cost of over $2 billion per year, which would cost $1 billion more per year than approved extension for 26 weeks. Mr. Speaker, I would like to turn to the issue of EI reform. The current extension of sickness benefits is part of our broader strategy to modernize the EI program. The pandemic laid bare a number of faults with the EI program. It made us recognize that the current EI program needs to evolve so that it can better respond to changing labour markets and workforce needs. Canada needs a modern EI program, one that better meets the needs of workers and employers. The plan to modernize EI must take into account the realities of those who use it. That's why we have been consulting with Canadians on how to build a simpler, fairer, and more flexible program. In 2021, we embarked on a 2-year consultation process on EI modernization. The consultation, which took place over 2 phases, is now complete. We are currently analyzing the input received from the various participants. Their insights are helping to guide us in designing a program that is more modern, resilient, accessible, adequate, and financially viable. Among other things, we heard that there is a need to reform the EI program to make it simpler, more responsive, and more inclusive. The program must evolve to support all types of workers, including freelance and self-employed workers. With Budget 2022, we confirmed our commitment to establishing an EI program with simpler and fairer rules for both workers and employers. Modernizing a program that serves millions of Canadians each is a serious task, and we are taking the time to get it right. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the public servants who have worked tirelessly to provide Canadians with the benefits and services essential to their well-being. Increasing the maximum duration of these 15 to 26 weeks will allow Canadians to focus on what is essential, their health. We have a plan, Mr. Speaker, a plan that promotes a healthy, resilient, inclusive labour market, and it includes, of course, EI reform. Today, Mr. Speaker, let's take note that every year, roughly 169,000 Canadians will benefit from the extension of EI sickness from 15 to 26 weeks. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Continuing debate, le débat continue. L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have the privilege to rise once again to reaffirm the importance of extending EI illness benefits to 52 weeks, as proposed in Bill C-215 by the member for Lévis-Lobinière. And I'd like to congratulate the Conservative Party for this position. This bill is the 11th of its type introduced in this House over the last 10 or so years. The Bloc Québécois alone tabled 3, the most recent being C-265 by my colleague for Salaberry-sur-Roi, which was called Loi Émilie Sans Façon. That was in 2021. I don't know what it will take to convince the Liberal government to listen to all of the unanimous voices that are being raised and that are loudly stating that it is important to bring these illness benefits to 50 or 52 weeks. After all, when the governing party was in opposition, it agreed. It agreed with this idea. And I think the Liberal Party should perhaps cast its mind back. Perhaps, in fact, it should spend some time on the other side of the House. That might remind it of some important things. After all, Bill C-291 was tabled by Denis Coderre, who was the member for Bourassa at the time. And the current Prime Minister loudly supported the idea. It's really quite something. All of the research having to do with employees, workers with a serious illness should convince us that it's important to take action in a nonpartisan fashion. Workers with a serious illness have been waiting for 50 years to get an adequate number of weeks. It is high time that this be settled once and for all. We did that, and we continue to do so when it comes to the Dying with Dignity legislation, and we should have the same level of ambition when it comes to sick workers so that they can take care of themselves, also with dignity. Today, the government has only one more thing to do: grant royal recommendation to this bill. The government should and must do this. It has the power to change things and make a real difference for all these workers who only have the EI system as a form of insurance. However, the EI system is completely outdated and requires an in-depth review. We're still waiting for that review, and there have been many broken promises along the way. My colleague in his speech said this was part of a strategy on EI. That makes absolutely no sense. What strategy? The EI system has not been reformed in 15 years. The Liberals said they would do that in 2019, in 2021, and now they're saying it again, but they've never actually done anything. The doors of the future are open to those who know how to push on them, as Coluche said. As this quote shows, we just need daring. And though this government has rarely shown daring, I hope that in this case, reason and ambition will convince it. After all, this government is a minority government, and the opposition parties have unanimously voted in favor of 50 weeks of illness benefits on several occasions. In 2019, a Bloc Québécois motion was adopted that the House requests that the government raise illness benefits under EI from 15 to 50 weeks in the next budget in order to support people with serious illness such as cancer. In 2020, the Bloc Québécois tabled Bill C-265, the Émilie Sans Façon law. In 2021, Bill C-265 was sent to the HUMA committee, which adopted it unanimously on June 17th and referred it back to the House. And at committee, Liberal members voted in favor. But unfortunately, it died on the order paper when the elections were triggered. Then in December 2021, Bill C-215 was tabled. And on October 17th, 2022, that bill was referred to HUMA and once again was adopted unanimously on October 19th. Once again, let's note that all committee members voted in favor of the bill. Now we are at report stage. Parliamentary democracy requires that the government consider members' opinion. And to claim that these are just private members' bills, which require royal recommendation, would indubitably be a disrespectful gesture which would violate the will of most elected officials in this House. On behalf of the citizens that we represent, we want this change. It would be anti-democratic and cowardly to refuse. As my colleague for Lévis-Lobinière said, let's hope that the Liberals won't hide behind the fact that a royal recommendation is needed. Now, the government will say that it has heard what we want. It announced quietly on a Friday afternoon that illness benefits will go up to 26 weeks starting on December 18th, but only for new applications. It's clear that the government hasn't actually been listening. No one actually asked for this. None of the unions, none of the groups representing workers, none of the groups representing unemployed people, UNIFOR, the Canadian Labour Congress, the FTQ, and so many others, they're all asking for 50 weeks. No one asked this government to stop halfway. This represents a half measure that will not really help people who are seriously sick. It will make thousands of them fall through the cracks. They won't be able to get the care they need or go back to work. There's a real lack of compassion and humanity here. Is this really all the government cares about when it comes to addressing illness, half measures? I hope not. In order to save a few dollars in the short term, the government is ready to let thousands of families drift into poverty, which will cost communities a lot more in the long term. Is that this government's economic approach? I certainly hope not. Sick workers who are paying into EI have a right to receive the maximum amount of benefits during their illness for a period of 50 to 52 weeks. Let's not forget that these are workers who pay into the system. And let's not forget that it takes 600 hours to qualify. and you only get 55% of the income. But now, as studies show, for many sick workers, it can take up to 41 weeks to get better. With 15 or 26 weeks, that's just not enough. Right now, there's a labor shortage. So what workers really want is to have the time they need to get better and to go back to work. And currently, with the 15 weeks, that just wasn't enough, and the 26-week system won't work either. As a society that wants a strong social safety net, this Liberal government should grant royal recommendation to this bill. It's only logical, and it takes some heart and ambition. Thank you.
The honourable member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The employment insurance program is antiquated and needs reform. So much has changed in the 5 decades since EI was imagined. For example, when EI was first brought in this country, it was built to support men as the breadwinner, a discriminatory concept that has perpetuated gender discrimination and the gender wage gap in the workforce since its inception. And here are the stats, Mr. Speaker. From 1972, when EI was first brought in, to the present, the labour force participation rate for women has almost doubled, rising from only 45% in 1972 to 85% today. This compares to a slight decline for men from 95% participation rates to 92% now. The EI system is just another example of systems in this country that were not built for equity and inclusion. During the recent human testimony around this bill, we heard from Madame Marie-Hélène Dubé, who has been running the 15 Weeks is Not Enough campaign for years and years. She battled cancer 3 times between 2003 and 2008, receiving only 15 weeks of benefits. This year, she went through the same nightmare yet again, still receiving only 15 weeks of support in a year when costs have skyrocketed. I raise my hands to Madame Dubé, who has continued to fight for better for everyone, even during the most difficult of times. As Marie-Hélène testified, setting the benefit period of EI sickness benefit at 26 weeks is going to let down the people who need it the most. Well, Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what this government did. It let people down, and it needs to be corrected. Extending the benefit period from 26 weeks to 52 weeks changes everything when it comes to treatment and recovery from illness or injury. And the Parliamentary Budget Officer has demonstrated that it is a viable change. We can pay for this, and Canadians agree it is a socially acceptable measure. It's shameful that despite support from Canadians, this government has failed to extend EI sickness benefits beyond 26 weeks. So opposition parties, like the NDP, must continue to advocate for Canadians who suffer from an illness or injury. That shouldn't have to happen. We need to make sure they have access to necessary employment insurance during their time of need. The NDP supports Bill C-215 as it strives toward giving Canadians more protection when accessing these essential benefits. The NDP has tabled similar private members' bills in previous parliaments, including in February 2020, when my colleague from Elmwood Transcona tabled C-212. The NDP is focused on making sure that people can receive much-needed income while they are recovering from an injury or illness, and C-215 provides more protection than what exists today. It allows workers the time they need to recover, something that is absolutely necessary post-pandemic, specifically as labour shortages in healthcare have delayed and prolonged access, diagnoses, and treatments, and as the realities of long COVID are becoming better understood. Now, I want to go back, Mr. Speaker, to the failings of only having 26 weeks of sickness benefits for women and diverse genders. The need for greater EI benefits disproportionately affects them, whether it's in their capacity as single parents or the fact that there is a gender wage gap in this country that doesn't afford them the opportunity to save at the same rates. In addition, I know personally that it is more difficult for women to get private sickness insurance because of the rates of breast cancer in this country. And if there is a history of cancer in your family, that risk profile is a consideration in the insurance company's assessment of allowing benefit. With 1 in 8 women in this country attacked by breast cancer, the chances of no family history are decreasing by the day. This leaves women uninsured and unprotected from financial risks of an illness they have no control over. Just another reason why gender inequities in the EI system need to be fixed. There are so many examples of where women were left out of the initial EI design. And Mr. Speaker, before I go on, this inspired me to go take a look at the employment numbers from 1972 to 2022. It wasn't available on Stats Canada website, but from 1976 was. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that women drove the growth of this economy over the last 50 years. We have an increase of almost 10 million employees since 1972, the majority of them women. The participation rate going from 44 to 88%. The majority of new workers in our economy are women. And I want to point out, Mr. Speaker, that in the healthcare and social science assistance category of how we classify workers, that has increased by 1.8, almost 2 million workers, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say it's shameful that that is one of the largest growing areas of our economy, and we waited this long for childcare. So I'm going to go back to cite Mouvement Action Chômage de Montréal, who invited legislators to correct the inequity of the act towards women who have received maternity or parental benefits or their equivalent from a provincial parental insurance plan, and the current ruling around injustices for 6 women who lost their jobs while on or just after parental leave and had their EI claims rejected because they hadn't worked the minimum number of hours needed to qualify for benefits. And to add insult to injury, this government continues to fight the Social Security Tribunal ruling that sections of the Employment Insurance Act violated women's constitutional rights to equality under the law. Standing here, Mr. Speaker, I don't know how the government can argue that. Why do women continually have to fight this government for equity and justice? So I asked in committee about gender inequities and if the gender lens was being applied in the current budgeting considerations for the government's movement to expand from 15 weeks. And here's what came back. I quote, Mr. Speaker, regarding the PBO's $1.9 billion estimated ongoing cost of an extension to EI sickness benefits from 15 to 52 weeks, the PBO's formula and budgeting did not segment potential beneficiaries by gender. The discriminatory analysis continues. In addition, a set of data that came back from the 2020 to 2021 Employment Insurance Monitoring and Assessment Report showed that a gender difference continues to exist between men and women in relation to EI sickness benefit. Yet, when analyzing that data for post-claim follow-up, this was the disclaimer on the data that came back. And I quote, Mr. Speaker, a breakdown of the findings above by gender is not available. Unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. We exist, we are here, and we are at work. In closing, New Democrats acknowledge that the 26 weeks is a step in the right direction, but it doesn't go far enough. Extending the framework from 26 weeks to 52 weeks is what is needed to accurately capture the needs of all people, allowing them to receive the necessary benefits during their recovery period. The government needs to do the right thing and do better for Canadians.
Continuing debate, le débat continue.
Ongoing, the honourable member for Beauce. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the pleasure and most of all the privilege to speak today to Bill C-215, a bill introduced by my very good colleague and friend, the member for Lévis-Lotbinière. First, I would like to thank him for introducing this very important bill. He's showing a lot of initiative and continuing to push for this bill to be passed. It is a very non-partisan bill. and that I think all members of this House should be able to support it to improve the lives of many Canadians across the country. In our ridings, and also mostly importantly in our personal lives, we know so many stories of people who have been diagnosed with cancer or who have suffered a terrible injury. These people don't have it easy. They face very serious challenges, and that is why it's so important to pass a bill like this to help our most vulnerable citizens. Imagine you're a roofer and you break your back on a job site, and now you're unable to return to work for several months. And then you're diagnosed with cancer, and then after an operation you can't go back to work for a long period of time. So the way the law is currently written, you only get 15 weeks of EI, Mr. Speaker. If you or someone like you are not yet ready to return to work after 15 weeks of benefits and you haven't received your doctor's authorization, you would be in a rather precarious situation. No need to remind all my colleagues that not everyone has a family to share the burden with, nor do they have the resources to support themselves financially beyond the 15-week maximum. One study determined that this type of problem affects approximately 150,000 people per year in Canada. This represents a distribution of about 446 people per riding across the country, which is quite an important amount. That's a staggering number, in fact, Mr. Speaker. It could be one of your neighbors, your friends, or even a family member. We live in a country that has a good EI system, but the government has not yet taken the necessary steps to extend the deadlines for serious and rare cases like these. In our country, we have many vulnerable Canadians who may one day fall ill. So we need to have a compassionate system that takes into account all types of possibilities. We need a real social safety net that will allow Canadians to feel safe and, above all, feel that they have the time to recover before they're forced to return to work, before they're fully recovered. 55% of Canadians will at some point need employment insurance. This is something that is inevitable, and that is why we need to look at laws like the EI legislation and, above all, try to find ways to strengthen them. Experts in this field all conclude that this legislation needs to be modified from its current maximum of 15 weeks. We need to listen to the experts and work with them to make these changes in the proper way. All parties must be listened to, and all options must be considered. Some members may be concerned about the issue of fraud or abuse of the system if we increase the maximum to 52 weeks. I would like to reassure my colleagues that this legislation is strong and it has many safeguards in place to avoid these types of problems. The EI system is extremely well monitored and verified throughout to catch potential fraudsters. A note or doctor's note is always required to receive EI payments, and the timeline is recommended by a medical professional. So I firmly believe that we should trust our healthcare providers who do such important work day after day across the country to diagnose and suggest a fair and scientific length of leave for each individual. We should trust our healthcare system to do the right thing properly. And I would like to remind all members of this House that a promise made in the 2021 Conservative platform was to extend the maximum EI benefit beyond the 15-week period. And with this bill, we intend to keep this promise. The same bill was introduced in the past, but unfortunately it had never received royal assent. I remember very well that both the Bloc and the NDP supported our bill the last time it was introduced. And I sincerely hope that we can once again count on their support this time. I sincerely hope that the NDP Liberal coalition will see that this bill is truly a good one and it will help so many Canadians. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know that some members will still have doubts and questions about this bill. Are we going too far? What about Canadians who do have private insurance? Well, don't worry. First of all, Canadians don't want to be sick or housebound. So we know that they will return to work as soon as they can in most cases. Second, for those who have private insurance, they must exhaust all their weeks of private insurance first before entering the federal program. In most cases, they'll be able to return to work without even needing to use Service Canada's EI. This bill will thus have no effect on the private insurance systems of our small and medium-sized enterprises. We would simply be there as a safety net for certain extenuating circumstances. Mr. Speaker, this is an affordable measure for the government, and it's also a very reasonable thing to do. Not only is it reasonable, but it's the right thing to do. Many Canadians pay into EI for their entire lives and never have to use it. But other Canadians are not so lucky. They must use this social safety net to keep a roof over their heads or food on the table in their time of need. I believe that our constituents who have paid taxes and paid benefits for social programs all their lives deserve to be looked after when a crisis hits their family. They deserve to feel protected by the government and deserve to be respected for all they do for society. As inflation continues to hit Canadians hard, as well as high interest rates, we must ensure everyone that we are there for them when they will really need us. And to conclude, Mr. Speaker, this bill is about giving Canadians the dignity they deserve and the help they need when they need it most. As I mentioned earlier in my speech, we're talking about our neighbors, our friends, and sometimes even our family members. Bad luck or illness can happen to anyone at any time. Long-term illnesses and exceptional accidents can happen in the blink of an eye. Therefore, it's the responsibility of our elected representatives to change a bill when they feel it's not up to scratch, and I believe this bill is one of them. I would like to wish all of my fellow citizens and Canadians good luck and health and happiness. And at this holiday time, I wish everyone the best, but if anything unfortunate should happen in your life, I would like you to know that the Conservative Party will support you in getting Bill C-215 passed. I'm very proud to have been able to speak to this bill today. And I would like to thank, once again, the member for Lévis-Lotbinière for his hard work on this issue and for standing up for vulnerable Canadians across the country. I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and I truly hope that we can pass this bill quickly and unanimously and receive the royal recommendation. It's a bill of which we can all be truly proud. Thank you.
Continuing debate, the honourable member for Waterloo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do want to start by thanking the member for Lévis-Lotbinière for his work on Bill C-215. As the Member of Parliament for the riding of Waterloo, I hear from many constituents. And when it comes to programs within our country, including unemployment insurance, it is a program that has been there to support workers when they are recovering from illness, injury. And it's important that they feel confident that they are supported. So it's nice to see that there is a Conservative member recognizing the importance of that system and strengthening that system. Oftentimes in this place, when we are voting or the government is advancing programs, that support is not always there from the official opposition. So in this private member's bill, it's an ability for us to at least hear from a private member within the Conservative benches and their support of strengthening unemployment insurance. So as I was saying, when Canadians are recovering from illness or injury, they deserve to feel confident that they are supported and that their jobs are protected. That's why the government is taking action to improve employment insurance sickness benefits. Just a few weeks ago, the Honourable Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion announced that as of December 18th, we are permanently extending EI sickness benefits from 15 weeks to 26. This extension will provide approximately 169,000 Canadians per year with additional time and flexibility to recover so they can return to work after an illness, injury, or quarantine. And right now, more than ever, it's really important that programs such as unemployment insurance, which workers pay into and then you receive that benefit, that you know that that program is there for you. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, the extension of EI sickness benefits from 15 to 26 weeks is not the only improvement taking effect on December 18th. I'm pleased to say that we are also increasing the maximum length of unpaid medical leave available to federally regulated private sector workers from 17 to 27 weeks. This change will ensure that workers in federally regulated industries have the right to take unpaid job-protected leave while receiving the extended EI sickness benefit. We have seen very uncertain and challenging times. We know that more than ever, we need to ensure that there is a government who is not only listening, engaging, but also responding to the very real needs of Canadians. And we saw the world go through a global health crisis. And in Canada, it was really important to have a government of the day who was actually responding to those needs. And when individuals were worried about paying rent, buying food, and the list goes on, because the country, the world was shut down, it was the government of the day who brought out the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. And we made sure that Canadians could actually have access to that benefit rather quickly, because we knew that they were anxious. It was a tough time. And they deserved a government who would be there for them. And so what did the government do? Our government, under the leadership of this Prime Minister, we stepped up. And we also heard from businesses, and the list goes on. And part of that conversation really was unemployment insurance. And small business owners, our job creators, often are not the ones who are paying into EI because they're worried about their workers and the people who they create jobs for. So when they needed access to that program, they actually were not eligible for it because they had not paid into it. But our government listened, and we made sure that we would find ways so that more people could benefit from this very important program that exists in Canada. I should also mention in passing that as of December 1st, 2022, federally regulated private sector workers will also begin accumulating up to 10 days of paid sick leave per year. This is something we've been hearing for a long time. In the riding of Waterloo, many constituents contact me, a diversity of perspectives and opinions, and this step was one that was really important and one that I heard often. And we also extended Working Well on Claim to include EI sickness and EI maternity benefits, giving people more flexibility so they can keep more of their benefits if they choose to gradually return to work. And it's important that we recognize that we do have changing environments, we do have opportunities, and we do need to ensure that there is some flexibility there. And I do know that part of that flexibility with members of Parliament who have always needed to take their seats to ensure that we can continue doing the important work of this House, we brought out a hybrid model. And members of Parliament were able to be in their ridings as well, do the work of the House of Commons and represent their constituents. So it's important that we do adjust and improve the way benefits are delivered so that more people can benefit from them. And, Mr. Speaker, these improvements are part of a broader plan to modernize Canada's EI system. And technically, we should be looking at all of our systems. Our overarching goal is to build an EI program that is fairer, more flexible, and more responsive to the needs of workers. And to achieve that goal, we asked for Canadians to also help. And that's why in August 2021, we began a 2-year consultation on EI reform to build an EI program that is more flexible, fair, and better suited to the needs of today's workers. And the best way to do and actually respond to what Canadians are asking for is to bring them into the conversation. And I think that's something that has often been lacking. Members of Parliament will rise in this place and really an honor and privilege to be here and say this is the solution, but never have spoken to constituents across the country. And I think it's really important that this consultation process is one that Canadians participate in, and I'm really pleased to see that we're doing it. And it's unfortunate that we've run out of time. So Mr. Speaker has let me know that we will be ending, I guess, our time for private members' business, and I look forward to this conversation continuing. And I hope to see more members recognize the importance of, improving our systems and strengthening programs such as unemployment insurance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now, the time provided for consideration of private members' business is now expired. The order is dropped to the bottom of the order of precedence on the order paper, and the member will have 3 minutes and 30 seconds left when we do come back to this. Orders of the day.
Orders of the day, government orders, government bills, Senate. First time consideration at second reading of Bill S8, an act to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act to make consequential amendments to other acts and to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulation, bill standing in the name of the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Medicino, seconded by Ms. Jazix, moves that Bill S8, an act to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act to make consequential amendments to other acts and to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Debate to the Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For almost 10 months, Canadians have watched in shock and horror at Russia's unjust, abhorrent, and illegal invasion of Ukraine. On February 24, 2022, without provocation, Russian forces initiated this egregious step, a blatant violation of international law, the Charter of the United Nations, and the rules-based international order. Ces attaques ont entraîné une dévastation.
These attacks caused widespread destruction of infrastructure and assets in Ukraine, as well as the senseless death of Ukrainians and civilians.
And acceleration of the violent steps taken by Russia since early 2014 to undermine Ukrainian security, sovereignty, and independence. The Government of Canada is committed to supporting those fleeing the destruction and devastation in Ukraine and provide a safe haven for those fleeing their war-torn home country. As we've said since the beginning, whether it's military, political, or economic support, Canada will continue to be there for Ukraine and hold Russia accountable. In the face of such brazen disregard for the international order, the Government of Canada has responded to the Russian invasion of Ukraine through the use of economic measures, including sanctions, to send a clear and unequivocal message that the aggression displayed by the Russian regime will not be tolerated. These measures apply pressure on the Russian leadership to end its senseless war, which has resulted in the loss of thousands of lives and caused indescribable suffering to the people of Ukraine. These measures are the latest example of Canada's unwavering commitment to Ukraine and its people. Since the invasion of Ukraine commenced in February, the Government of Canada has imposed sanctions under the Special Economic Measures Act on almost 1,200 individuals in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. D'autres sanctions.
Further targeted sanctions are forthcoming in response to Russian attacks and aggression. All of this shows that Canada is a leader in the international effort to hold Russian leaders accountable for this violent attack, unprovoked attack against Ukraine.
Imposed additional sanctions under the CIMA against Iranian officials in response to the Iranian regime's ongoing grave breaches of international peace and security and gross human rights violations. These breaches and violations include its systemic persecution of women and, in particular, the egregious actions committed by Iran's so-called morality police, which led to the death of Mahsa Amini, while in their custody. Targeted sanctions have been imposed against senior Iranian officials and prominent entities that directly implement repressive measures, violate human rights, and spread the Iranian regime's propaganda and misinformation. The legislative amendments we are introducing to the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act will provide Canada with much-needed abilities to better align government-imposed sanctions with authorities related to immigration enforcement and access to Canada. The IRPA defines when a person is inadmissible to Canada and establishes the applicable criteria for all foreign nationals and permanent residents who seek to enter or remain in Canada. However, IRPA, as it stands, is incongruous with our inadmissibility regime. Its inadmissibility provisions do not clearly align with the basis for imposing the majority of CIMA sanctions issued against Russia and Iran. Issuing sanctions against these countries on the grounds of a grave breach of international peace and security, which has resulted in the serious situation we see today, does not automatically trigger inadmissibility. This means that most individuals sanctioned pursuant to CIMA may nevertheless have access to travel to, enter, or remain in Canada if they are not otherwise deemed inadmissible.
This goes against Canada's political and policy objectives with regard to application of sanctions and restrictions on foreign nationals who are part of the Russian and Iranian regimes or who are key supporters of these regimes.
Amendments are required on an urgent basis to align the IRPA sanctions inadmissibility regime clearly with that of CIMA. Mr. Speaker, that is why I am here today to introduce Bill S-8, an act to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act that will, among other things, expressly align the IRPA with CIMA to ensure all foreign nationals subject to sanctions under CIMA will be inadmissible to Canada. If passed, the current inadmissibility ground relating to sanctions will be expanded to ensure that foreign nationals subject to sanctions for any reason under the CIMA will be inadmissible to Canada. This includes foreign nationals sanctioned not only in Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and Iran, but also sanctioned individuals from Myanmar, South Sudan, Syria, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and North Korea. In addition, these amendments will also modernize the current sanction inadmissibility framework set out in IRPA. Permettez-moi d'expliquer
I would like to now explain the importance of this legislation and the reasons why I hope it will pass.
Amendments of this bill will allow for all sanctions related to inadmissibility grounds to be treated in a cohesive and coherent manner, strengthen inadmissibility legislation that we already have in place, rendering persons subject to sanctions inadmissible to Canada, ensure that the sanctions imposed by the Government of Canada will have direct consequences in terms of immigration and access to Canada, and allow Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada officials to deny temporary or permanent resident visas overseas, and authorize Canada Border Services Agency officials to deny entry to and remove from Canada sanctioned individuals. Once in force, these amendments will apply to all foreign nationals who are subject to sanctions issued unilaterally by Canada and to their immediate family members. These changes would ensure that all Russian and Iranian officials sanctioned under CIMA and their sanctioned supporters are inadmissible to Canada. Without the proposed amendments, Mr. Speaker, those who are sanctioned in response to the situations in Ukraine and Iran are not necessarily inadmissible unless they have violated some other provision of IRPA. This proposed legislation will completely close that gap.
This approach is also aligned with recent legislation and is inspired by it. Recent legislation which had strong support.
A 2017 report by the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development entitled A Coherent and Effective Approach to Canada's Sanctions Regimes, Sergei Magnitsky and beyond, the committee recommended that the IRPA ought to be amended to designate all individuals sanctioned under CIMA as inadmissible to Canada. Subsequently, also in 2017, the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act, also known as the Sergei Magnitsky Law, or Bill S-226, came into force. This act created two new inadmissibility grounds, which aligned with certain sanctions provisions related to international human rights violations and significant corruption. Subsequent amendments to the IRPR were also made so that delegated CBSA officers, as opposed to the Immigration Division of the Immigration and Refugee Board, were empowered to issue removal orders directly at ports of entry for individuals inadmissible pursuant to the newly created sanctions inadmissibility provisions. Cela a permis d'éviter que ces personnes.
This made it possible to make it such that people could not be physically sent back to Canada for hearings before the Immigration Board.
CBSA with the necessary funding to work with Global Affairs Canada and Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada to ensure that inadmissible sanctions cases are identified as early as possible in the travel continuum to prevent them from gaining access to our country. These investments and the effective work of border management and immigration officials in Canada and abroad support the proposed legislative amendments that I am seeking your support for today. Furthermore, while funding from Budget 2018 ensured the proposed amendments were completed in a timely manner, the timeline of this proposal was adjusted to realign with border management and public safety priorities related to the necessary COVID-19 pandemic response. Nevertheless, proactive development of the amendments in Bill S-8 has enabled a timely legislative response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Iran's violent crackdown against civilian protesters. Further to the work already done, there are additional complementary and coordinating amendments introduced in this bill which are required to align inadmissibility provisions with the sanctions provisions while maintaining the integrity of both frameworks. First, all of the sanctions inadmissibility provisions will be treated in a cohesive and coherent manner, as I said. This includes, for instance, adding a temporal element to all of the sanctions inadmissibility provisions, which means that a person is only inadmissible for as long as they remain on a sanctions list. In addition, as is the case today with IRPA, immediate family members of foreign nationals inadmissible for sanctions are also inadmissible. Similarly, existing provisions of IRPA with respect to immigration detention and sanctioned individuals would apply to the new sanctioned grounds. Second, further legislative amendments in this bill will ensure that the inadmissibility framework related to multilateral sanctions, such as sanctions issued in concert with the United Nations, will be expanded to include groups or non-state entities as opposed to only when states are sanctioned, as is the case today. Currently, sanctions issued against groups and non-state entities, such as Al-Qaeda or ISIL, do not automatically trigger sanctions-related inadmissibility ground. The proposed amendments will further facilitate interdiction and enforcement for sanctions issued multilaterally. Make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, these proposed amendments will improve Canada's ability to identify and stop sanctioned foreign nationals before they can get to Canada. In the event that some do nevertheless arrive at our borders, delegated CBSA officers will have the authority to issue removal orders immediately at ports of entry for all those inadmissible for sanctions. Il est important de noter que la sanction d'interdiction.
It's important to note that inadmissibility sanctions are the most effective and efficient way to quickly identify those who are inadmissible as soon as possible in the travel process, in order to prevent them from obtaining a visa to travel to Canada.
While other inadmissibility provisions may be applicable to some sanctioned individuals, it should not be assumed that all sanctioned individuals are also inadmissible for other grounds. Moreover, other potentially relevant inadmissibility grounds, such as those relating to engaging in war crimes, require extensive investigation, case-by-case analysis, and hearings before the Immigration and Refugee Board before they can be applied and yield consequences. It is not expected to be the case that all individuals who are sanctioned can, in fact, also be found inadmissible for some other ground under IRPA. Unless there is a clear and specific ground for inadmissibility in the IRPA against a given individual, immigration and border officers do not have discretion to deny access to Canada. These amendments are therefore vital to ensuring consistent alignment between inadmissibility and sanctions. Bill S-8 will also support other inadmissibility and immigration enforcement measures being pursued with respect to Iran. Additional measures against the Iranian regime were announced on October 7. The Prime Minister announced that the Government of Canada would be seeking to designate the Iranian regime under IRPA. This means that in addition to the individual sanctions, the top 50%, the most senior echelons and most responsible members of the Iranian regime for egregious serial human rights violations will be considered inadmissible to Canada once the regime has been designated, and indeed that has been done. Other refinements are included in the proposed amendments in S8. For instance, we will correct an inconsistency with respect to refugee policy that was created through Bill S-226. The Sergei Magnitsky law rendered inadmissible foreign nationals ineligible to make a refugee claim. However, multilateral sanctions, such as those issued under the United Nations Act, do not have the same consequence in the IRPA. La Convention sur les réfugiés elle-même n'identifie.
The Refugee Convention itself does not identify sanctions as such as sufficient to justify the exclusion of refugee protection.
Amendments in this bill would correct that asymmetry and ensure that foreign nationals are not ineligible to have a refugee claim referred to the Refugee Protection Division of the Immigration and Refugee Board on account of being inadmissible solely due to sanctions in line with Canada's international obligations. Given the measures in place to deny sanctioned individuals access to our borders, in the rare case where an individual can apply for refugee protection in Canada, all foreign nationals inadmissible due to sanctions who are granted refugee or protected person status would not be eligible to become permanent residents while those sanctions are in place. This is a balanced yet firm approach. In addition, should a person inadmissible due to sanctions be subject to removal proceedings, they would be eligible to apply for a pre-removal risk assessment, ensuring a fair assessment of risks facing the person upon removal from Canada. In recognition of sanctions being a deliberate statement of government policy, further amendments are proposed to narrow the available pathways to overcome inadmissibility for sanctions within IRPA. I believe that lifting of the sanction in and of itself is the mechanism by which the consequences of a sanction should be avoided. As such, the bill proposes to remove access to ministerial relief for individuals who are inadmissible for sanctions. Furthermore, individuals inadmissible for sanctions would not have access to an appeal of the inadmissibility decision before the Immigration Appeal Division, nor may they make an application for permanent residence on humanitarian and compassionate grounds under our proposed amendments. Any request for recourse related to sanctions ought to be made to the sanctions issuing body.
For example, people banned from entry due to Canadian sanctions could present a request to be delisted to the Department of Foreign Affairs.
As with all decisions under IRPA, the federal court will continue to have jurisdiction to conduct judicial review of inadmissibility determinations on the basis of sanctions. The bill also includes coordinating amendments to the Emergencies Act and the Citizenship Act to maintain and clarify existing authorities related to sanctions inadmissibility in those pieces of legislation. Honorables députés, maintenant.
Honourable members, now more than ever we must act to align the IRPA sanctions regime with the CIMA regime.
Senators have agreed to adopt the motion and, to quote Senator Ahmedvar, have marked this bill as, quote, super urgent. I urge you to review Bill S-8 with the same sense of urgency. The bill will provide Canada with much-needed authorities to better link government sanctions, as well as authorities necessary for our immigration officials to deny access to Canada. It also better enables us to contribute to concerted action with our international partners. Le projet de loi que nous présentons aujourd'hui.
The bill we are presenting today is a prudent and exhaustive approach, which will enable our government to respond to the Russian and Iranian regime's aggression with appropriate immigration-related consequences.
Legislation and these amendments will provide a clear and strong message that the Government of Canada's comprehensive sanctions framework has meaningful and direct consequences, not only from an economic perspective, but from an immigration and access to Canada perspective as well, and in doing so, allow us to stand up for human rights both here and abroad. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Merci.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for Medicine Hat, Carson Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague across the way for the speech. You know, what I find interesting is that in May, the Senate, in 1 month, the Senate went through all stages, report stage, committee stage, debate stage, to bring it back to this House in May of 2022. And yet we are now the last couple days of the 2022, and this government must be out of their debt-inducing legislation. They decided to finally bring this forward. Can the minister finally tell us why it took so long to get this bill before the House?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that my colleague from the Conservative Party is quite anxious to see this legislation passed into law, and all he needs to do, along with his colleagues in the Conservative Party, is to vote for it. And I can't wait to see that moment. But I do want to also assure him and all members of this chamber that even as this bill has made its way through the parliamentary process, that we have acted decisively, delivering among the strongest sanctions against those offenders of human rights, as well as those who are visiting upon women and other vulnerable individuals in Iran, the absolutely most atrocious violations with brutal attacks and the murder of the likes of Mahsa Amini. That's why, not only in addition to this legislation, we made sure that we designated the entirety of the Iranian regime under IRPA so that we could prevent and stop those who are most responsible, the architects of these violations, from ever setting foot in Canada again. Thank you.
Question commentaire. L'honneur of the député de Berthier.
The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm very pleased to see this bill. I do think this is something we need to deal with quickly. I'd like the minister to reassure me on one point. If someone is not allowed to come to Canada after sanctions, it was mentioned that the person could ask to get an assessment of the reason for that. Now, generally, people here who are in oligarchs' families that are targeted by sanction, generally these are people with money. So these are people who will be able to do all sorts of things and stretch it out. So I've been looking through the legislative summary here, and I can't find a clear answer. Are there concrete measures to ensure that people can't take the money that they stole from their people and use that to start a whole series of legal procedures so that they can't actually be expelled from the country? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, the short answer is yes. There are measures not just in this bill, but also elsewhere to prevent the efforts of those who want to help the Iranian regime against human rights. And in addition, the goal of this bill is to close the door thanks to amendments to IRPA. And that's why I would encourage my colleagues from the Bloc Québécois and other members in the House to support this important legislation. That's another way that we can stop these efforts from people who are not eligible under IRPA to come to Canada, and in order to defend human rights here and elsewhere.
The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for his speech. And the NDP, of course, supports getting this bill to committee. This is an important step in terms of improving our sanctions regime, but there are other aspects that are not included in the bill. There has been a delay around bringing this bill forward. We've seen, of course, with the appalling violent invasion of Ukraine by the Putin regime, that there were on the sanctions list in other countries people connected to the Putin regime that weren't on the Canadian sanctions list. So parliamentary oversight is vitally important. Having access to the sanctions list by the public and by public officials is extremely important too. Will the government agree to amendments at committee stage that will allow us to improve the bill so that there is more parliamentary oversight over our important sanctions regime?
Honourable Minister.
Well, I want to thank my colleague, the House Leader for the NDP, and I think he knows both me and our government to be very reasonable when it comes to making improvements to bills, certainly at the committee stage. So we will be inviting of a good, robust debate about the amendments that have been put forward. I do want to assure him, though, that this will strengthen the regime under IRPA. It will give us additional powers to make good on the suite of sanctions that we have delivered to the Iranian regime, and specifically to those individuals who are the perpetrators of egregious human rights, to ensure that they never set foot in Canada. Because it is too important. It is too important to the women in Iran who are standing up for their rights, the ability to express themselves fully and freely, as all individuals, no matter where they are from, which country they were born in, have an inalienable right to do. And this legislation will ensure that Canada is a beacon of those human rights by sending a very strong message that if you support those transgressions, there are direct consequences. This bill, with its amendments, allows us to advance that objective. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. After listening to Conservatives' intervention, it seems as though they're eager to get moving with this, and they would like nothing more than to see this move. So I'm sure we won't get that typical response from Conservatives to delay every piece of legislation, and they won't require putting up 50 speakers and then putting forward an amendment so that they can put up another 50 speakers. I'm wondering if the minister can comment on why it's important to get this piece of legislation to committee and ultimately have the legislation adopted, why it's important to do that sooner rather than later.
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
I thank my honourable colleague from Kingston and 1,000 Islands for his question, for his hard work every day in this chamber, for being an advocate for human rights. And it is indeed the need to stand up for human rights that makes this particular bill so urgent. The individuals who are responsible for transgressions of human rights, who go out and brutalize and torture and kill innocent women and other vulnerable individuals in that country need to be held account. And Canada has consistently and strongly been outspoken in the need to deliver sanctions and consequences so that they can never set foot in Canada, and so that equally that no one in this country can in any way try to support or facilitate those transgressions of human rights. And what this bill proposes to do is to strengthen our capacity to deliver those consequences by rendering inadmissible, through more clearly articulated express language under IRPA, the ability to make good on that. And so the sooner we can get to committee, the sooner we can pass this bill into law, the better, Mr. Speaker. And I am somewhat encouraged, perhaps it's the time of year, by the anxiousness that I hear from our Conservative colleagues that we can move forward with it. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire, the Honourable Member for Peace River Westlock.
Hi. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We heard extensively how this minister seems to be very proud of what the government is doing in terms of sanctioning. I'm just wondering, on what day will his government register the IRGC as a terrorist organization? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I want to assure him that by designating the entirety of the Iranian regime under IRPA, which is a provision that has only been reserved for the most egregious violations of human rights, as well as war crimes and genocide, that we are putting within our crosshairs the IRGC. And this is why this particular statutory mechanism is more fit for purpose. It allows us to look at the most responsible individuals who are perpetrating those egregious human rights violations, to make sure that they can never set foot in Canada, and so that those who would try to help the Iranian regime from here are not able to do so. This bill makes sure that we are, with more precise language, able to deliver on those sanctions. Thank you.
In comments, the Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Speaker, I got to say to the Minister of Public Safety that what is it going to take to list the IRGC as a terrorist organization? They shot down PS 752, which was done intentionally as a terrorist act. They fund Hamas and Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations throughout the world. They continue to commit all sorts of atrocities against their own civilians in Iran, and now they're participating in a defense cooperation agreement with Russia in the war in Ukraine by having kamikaze drones being flown into civilian infrastructure to make a long, cold, hard winter for Ukrainians. Why won't this government wake up and finally list the IRGC as a terrorist organization, as this Parliament called for unanimously in 2018?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, and I share my colleague's concern for the people of Ukraine. That is why this government has been out front in helping Ukraine with military aid, with humanitarian aid, by delivering sanctions that are at the very, very top tier of making sure that we hold the members of the Iranian regime accountable. Mr. Speaker, as my colleague knows, it's the difference between looking at just one tentacle or the entire entity. And by listing the entirety of the Iranian regime, we are also making sure that we are able to put those members of the IRGC who are responsible on the list of being inadmissible. That's how we hold those who are responsible, Mr. Speaker, and we'll continue to do whatever is necessary to stand with Ukraine. Thank you.
Continuing debate, reprise du débat. The Honourable Member for Simcoe North.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Before I start, I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to split my time.
Is it okay? Is there unanimous consent to split the time with the Honourable Member? It's agreed. The Honourable Member for Simcoe North.
My time with the wonderful member for Medicine Hat, Carsons Warner. Mr. Speaker, it's always a pleasure to rise in this chamber to speak to legislation. Today we're talking about Bill S8 to ensure that foreign nationals that are subject to economic sanctions are not able to enter into our country. But since we're also talking about human rights, I did want to take a moment to address an incident that happened this weekend to a very important person in this Parliament, Irwin Cotler, who was at a movie premiere or a documentary premiere documenting his life and his work, tirelessly working for human rights across the world, and he was openly harassed and criticized now at this event, which disrupted the event and made quite a mockery of the whole thing and made people very uncomfortable. And everyone should be open for public criticism and debate, as Mr. Cotler always is and never shied away from. But we are losing our decency in a society if we think it's acceptable to treat our fellow humans in this way. In many circumstances, criticism of accomplished Jewish people are often routed in some form of anti-Semitism. And it's okay to disagree with each other, and we should encourage that at all times. But free speech also comes with a responsibility to treat each other with respect and decency. So we are now 10 months into Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, but it was at least back into 2014 where Russia took actions and annexed Crimea. This egregious step was a blatant violation of international law. And these attacks have caused widespread devastation in Ukraine, infrastructure, property, deaths of a number of civilians, notably women and children. These actions are a continuation of an accelerated aggressive steps by Russia in Ukraine. These steps, they threaten the international rules-based order. And Canada responded in part through the use of economic measures, as did many of our allies. And these sanctions are contained in the Special Economic Measures Act. They affect about 1,000 individuals in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The bill we have before us seeks to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, or IRPA, as we just heard the minister refer to it, in order to do several things, as I understand. The bill seeks to reorganize the existing inadmissibility provisions relating to sanctions in order to establish a distinct ground of inadmissibility based on sanctions that Canada may impose in a response to an act of aggression. Second, it proposes to expand the scope of inadmissibility based on such sanctions to include not only sanctions imposed on a country, but also those imposed on an entity or a person, which is important given we had just listed individuals as part of economic sanctions, not just countries. Third, it expands the scope of inadmissibility based on the sanctions to include all orders and regulations made under Section 4 of the Special Economic Measures Act. And lastly, it amends the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act to provide the Ministers of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, instead of the Immigration Division, and the Immigration Division, they will have the authority to issue a removal order on the grounds of inadmissibility based on sanctions under a new paragraph of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. So this will provide Canada with a needed ability to better link the government actions and economic sanctions and those who are seeking to come into Canada and experience our wonderful life here that we've built. The Immigration Refugee Protection Act defines when a person is inadmissible to Canada and establishes the applicable criteria for all foreign nationals and permanent residents who seek to enter or remain in Canada. However, its inadmissibility provisions do not align on the basis for imposing majority of economic sanctions. So this means that an individual who has been sanctioned economically can still show up to Canada, claim refugee protection, and voila, they're here in Canada, able to experience the life that we've built. This is quite clearly a loophole, and a loophole that undermines the confidence in our system and laws. Canadians will not accept that these sanctioned individuals could remain in Canada, and this loophole matters not just to Russian actors, but let's not forget about other countries that have citizens who are also subject to some of these sanctions. We mentioned Belarus, Myanmar, South Sudan, Syria, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, North Korea, and of course, Iran. And with Iran, I would also mention that we should be doing much more than we're doing with Iran. We just heard an exchange between members of the opposition and the minister on that front. And it is important to list the IRGC as a terrorist organization. This was the will of this House, constituted back in 2018 and again reaffirmed by this House just recently. We must act much more forcefully with respect to the IRGC, and Canadians expect that of us, Mr. Speaker. Canada is often behind the curve when it comes to some of these international actions. This is becoming part of our international reputation, and it's not a good one. We've been late with Magnitsky sanctions. We often wait to see where the political winds are blowing. We're too careful not to offend anyone. Let's consider the government's official response to the Iranian protests, as we've discussed, or the treatment of the Uyghur population by the Communist Party of China. We have been calling on the government to do more, and they continually shy away from their responsibility. We are not being taken as seriously by the international community as we once were. All too often, Canada's position is not substantive, and it's not principle-based. It's slow to act, and often with half measures. Take, for example, this government's frenetic position on China. If you don't like what the government's policy on China is, you just have to ask another minister, and you'll eventually get the answer that you like. Often this government's caught without a plan. It requires significant public shaming to get some action. Take, for example, the international commitment to fight money laundering, and through introducing beneficial ownership registry and regime. This is exactly connected to preventing these individuals who are sanctioned economically from hiding their assets across the world. And guess what? Canada has one of the weakest laws for identifying assets and the beneficial ownership. We are one of the only countries that have yet to introduce the beneficial ownership registry. This government promised to do it all the way back in 2019, said they wouldn't get to it until 2025. Now they say they're going to bring it in at the end of next year, but we're still waiting to see the legislation. So this government has, yes, they've agreed to fast track it, but there's still much more to do. All the other countries are moving so much further ahead of us when it comes to fighting global money laundering. And again, it's connected to this piece of legislation because these individuals have assets all across the world. And so yet it might be the case that we will not allow sanctioned individuals to come into Canada now, Mr. Speaker. But that individual could still hide their assets here because guess what? We don't have a way of finding out who owns what in this country. So we need to do much more quickly on this front, Mr. Speaker. And once again, you know, this government says all the right things but fails to execute on much of it. Yes, we see some action here, but I guess as the saying goes, a broken clock is right at least twice a day. And so, Mr. Speaker, S8, you know, I look forward to the committee discussions. I think it's an important piece of legislation. You've heard members in this chamber already on the opposition side say, you know, why is it taking so long? We, of course, look forward to moving this legislation through to committee, addressing perhaps some of the amendments that were brought forward by the NDP. And, you know, it's an important piece of legislation, but again, an important step for this country to put in place measures that make it harder for individuals who have violated human rights and international laws to come to this country and to remain in a wonderful country that we have built and get the advantages of the political system, the legal system that we have built. It is with great pleasure that I speak in favor of this legislation. I look forward to it going to committee and look forward to the continuing debate and the questions from my colleagues. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are also in agreement with this, and we want to make sure that we have everything in our possession to protect our people. So I heard my colleague earlier talk about that we were lagging behind. That's not just in terms of defense and foreign affairs. It's obvious, Mr. Speaker, we're also dragging behind on the environment and personal protection of information. And every time we talk with our peers from other countries, we realize that we're somewhat ashamed. So how come after 10 months that we all agree on this, and this is a second reading, we realize this, how come things have dragged on so long? How come the government didn't take action before? The Honourable Member for Simcoe North. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
To my honourable colleague for the question. As it was mentioned previously, this bill was passed in the Senate in the spring and has been sitting actually all fall waiting for it to be dealt with in this chamber. And so now it's a couple days before we rise for the winter holidays, and we're being asked to fast track it. Listen, we hope that it does get to committee quickly, but at the same time it has been sitting there on the paper waiting all fall, waiting for somebody to pick it up and waiting for the government to move it forward. So we're happy to see that progress today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
In comments, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I mean, I don't know. I tend to disagree with my friend from the bloc who suggests that Canada is lagging behind or that Canada is not well respected throughout the world. Yeah, there's always more work to be done, and I know that we have to fight to do that. But I can recall when I was on the Defense Committee being in Ukraine and hearing about how all these other countries, particularly the European countries, wanted to be part of the Canadian Brigade because they wanted to line up behind Canada because they saw Canada as a leader in the world when it came to ensuring peace and stability. So I don't know if I would entirely agree with the comment, but to my Conservative friend, he said that this has just been sitting here all fall waiting to be picked up. Does he think that perhaps if Conservatives had not been playing games with other legislation by the member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Real Lakes coordinating random quorum calls in the middle of debates, by the various different games that have been put forward to delay tactics by the Conservatives, that perhaps we may have seen this bill come forward a little sooner?
The Honourable Member for Simcoe North.
No, I don't think so, Mr. Speaker.
In comments, question et commentaire. Questions and comments? Good. Well, continuing on. The Honourable Member for Medicine Hat, Carson Warner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to address Bill S8, an act to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, make consequential amendments to other acts, and to amend the Immigration and Protection Regulations. The bill before us actually seeks to make several changes to the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. The bill proposes to reorganize existing inadmissibility provisions relating to sanctions. This proposal is to establish a distinct ground of inadmissibility based on sanctions that Canada may impose in response to an act of aggression. Mr. Speaker, when Russian dictator Putin invaded Ukraine, the world watched in horror. A democratic country in a region of the world where I and so many other Canadians have family roots was being shelled and attacked with hostile aggression. Since the invasion of Ukraine commenced in February, the Government of Canada has imposed sanctions under the Special Economic Measures Act, also known as CEMA, on over 1,000 individuals in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. However, these sanctions on their own were not grounds that would have been enough to prevent these friends of Putin from gaining citizenship, permanent residency, or refugee status here in Canada. And Bill S8 serves to correct that loophole. Section 8 also proposes to expand the scope of inadmissibility based on such sanctions. It recommends to include not only sanctions imposed on a country, but also those imposed on an entity or a person. Such sanctions are becoming more and more common as we see dictatorial governments where the citizenry need not be held accountable for the tyrannical actions of the dictator in charge. where sanctions against the country, although beneficial to show Canada's opposition to the actions of a rogue government in practicality, have the largest negative impact against those citizens. It's those citizens who now would bear the weight of a corrupt dictator and face the unintended impacts of our sanctions. S8 also expands the scope of inadmissibility based on sanctions to include all orders and regulations made under Section 4 of SEMA, the Special Economic Measures Act. It also amends the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations to provide the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, instead of the Immigration Division, to have authority to issue a removal order on grounds of inadmissibility based on sanctions under the new Section 35 of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. And it's on this, Mr. Speaker, that gives me pause. I understand the value of having the ability to have the Minister of Public Safety step in and become involved should the situation warrant it. But this current minister is certainly not a beacon of responsibility, accountability, and trust. Let's not forget that it was this Minister of Public Safety in his previous position as Minister of Immigration who was responsible for failing to protect the Afghan interpreters that Canada relied upon in the war in Afghanistan. Let's not forget that it was this Minister of Public Safety that introduced the strongest emergency legislation in Canada against his own citizens when he invoked the Emergencies Act to avoid meeting with Freedom Convoy organizers who came here to be heard by their government. Let's not forget that it was the same minister who was having the Liberal colleagues, his Liberal colleagues, turn Bill C-21 from a ban on law-abiding handgun owners and sport shooters to an all-out targeting of hunters, farmers, and Indigenous Canadians. But, Mr. Speaker, if I were to go through all the failures of this Minister of Public Safety, I would indeed take more time than I need to, and I know my colleagues are eagerly waiting to speak. So maybe I can take solace in knowing that the powers in this legislation will belong to a Conservative Minister of Public Safety after the next election. But I digress. Mr. Speaker, currently the laws of Canada do not directly specify that international sanctions are a basis upon which we can reject permanent residence, citizenship, or refugee applications. We do have faith in our bureaucracy to make the decisions that need to be made to protect Canada and the enjoyment of citizenship, permanent residency, or refugee status. This new framework would provide them the ability to make clear and direct decisions that will completely implement the will of Parliament and fully utilize existing laws like the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act, also known as Canada's Sergei Magnitsky laws. Mr. Speaker, for Canadians at home, Bill S-8 also practically ensures that no sanctioned individual can appeal the actions taken against them and their application for citizenship, permanent residency, or refugee status due to the vagueness of the laws. With Bill S-8, the bureaucracy cannot simply without Bill C-S-8, the bureaucracy cannot simply disallow an application on the grounds of the applicant being a sanctioned individual. Now they need to go through a more untraditional process of excluding them for the actions that got them onto the sanctions list, which can lead to vagueness in their rejection. But we know these sanctioned individuals typically are coming to Canada with their ill-gotten gains. They therefore have the means available to them to hold up the process, litigate the decisions, and not only tie up our courtroom and appeal process from those deserving of that process, but cost the Canadian government and taxpayers time and money dealing with the process. I'm glad that the government has finally taken the time in this House to implement the Magnitsky Law and the Magnitsky Act, and in a manner that gives it some teeth. So Conservatives are supporting this bill. We have always strongly supported sanctions against individuals, entities, and countries which threaten the national interest or international law. We have been critical of cases where individuals with ties to prescribed organizations, but not necessarily on a terrorist list, have been allowed entry to Canada. We've always put the national interest first with respect to questions of citizenship and immigration. And Conservatives have strongly supported the Magnitsky Act. Canadians should not worry that sanctioned individuals are seeking to enter our communities when so many legal, law-abiding applicants are waiting to immigrate. Our allies must also be assured that we will uphold our sanctions. I'll leave you with this in closing, Mr. Speaker. This legislation was introduced, as was mentioned previously, by the Senate in May of this year. It was passed through the Senate in under a month. That's including first reading, second reading with debate, committee stage, the report stage, and the third reading with debate. The Liberal government finally introduced Bill S8 to the House of Commons on October 4th, and now, December 12th, it finally gets floor time. We wonder why it took the Liberals so long to close this gap in our immigration law. What's been the holdup? Well, it would seem that the Liberals have run out of debt-inducing legislation and have decided to use these final few days before Christmas to move forward with the legislative priorities of Canadians. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for... It's funny how you call it 1,000 times. Couch and Malahat Langford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In several other public safety bills, notably Bill C-20 and Bill C-26, I've noticed in the way that the bills are written, there's a lack of avenue for parliamentary oversight. And one thing that's been missing with this sanctions regime is also a lack of parliamentary oversight. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, to my honourable colleague is, would Conservatives join with New Democrats at committee to look for avenues in which this bill can be strengthened to buttress up parliamentary oversight so that members of this House can make sure that the government is doing its job when it should be doing its job? Thank you very much.
Honourable member for Medicine Hat, Carson Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my friend for that great question. I think any time that we have legislation before this House that impact Canadians, it's a must that we have parliamentary oversight. At some point in time, well-intended actions don't necessarily turn out the way legislation is written. So it's critical, and I would agree with him that some sort of oversight to provide Parliament with a final say on how this should look would be most appropriate, in my opinion.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the excellent speech. I would just ask him, so part of this, of course, is to prevent human rights violators from entering our country, but in order for them to be stopped, they have to be named, and the Magnitsky sanctions have not been well used. In fact, in the last 5 years, there's been 0 folks named. Does he believe that this government is dropping the ball when it comes to labeling human rights violators?
For Medicine Hat, Carson Warner.
Yes, thank you to my friend for the question. And absolutely, one needs to look no further than the government's refusal and absolute hesitancy to deal with the IRCG as a terrorist organization. And that you need not look any further than that to have an answer to that question. Is an absolute, they are dragging their feet.
The honourable member for Laurentides-Laval. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I asked a question earlier to my colleague with respect to why, since the spring, considering the scope and the importance of this issue and the identification of terrorist groups and to preserve the security of Canadians, well, I'll ask the question to my next colleague as well. Why did it take so long to have this before us today, just a few days before the parliamentary session will rise?
Medicine Hat, Carson Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my friend for the great question. I've learned, I've been in this place now a little over 6 years, and I've learned that I can no longer answer questions or be able to understand why the Liberal government does what they do. And so I have stopped. And so, with all due respect, I don't know why they have waited since May to bring this legislation forward. It seems to me that they had other agendas that were going to have negative impact on Canadians, and rather than the will of Canadians, this is something that Canadians have asked for some time, and I will give them credit. They finally did it at the 11th and a half hour, but they brought it forward.
Commentaire, questions and comments? Continuing debate, l'honorable député de Berthier-Maskinongé.
The honourable member for Berthier-Maskinongé. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise to speak to S8 in this House today. Now, this bill is very simple. The issue at hand is quite clear and simple. So what this bill will do is add a ground for inadmissibility, that is, being the having sanctions, economic or other sanctions. And thank you for reminding me. I would like to share my time with my wonderful, kind colleague from Shefford, and I believe I need unanimous consent to do so, Mr. Speaker. Does the member have the unanimous consent of the House to share his time? Agreed. The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you to my colleagues. We're not always in agreement, but here we have unanimous consent. That's great. So as I was saying, this bill is really simple. We want to be coherent. So when there are sanctions against individuals, for example, Russian oligarchs come to mind, but it could be Iranian groups or groups from other countries. So when there are groups of individuals targeted by sanctions, they can be removed from Canada for those reasons. So this bill has impacts on various provisions and measures. So there's the Victims of Corrupt Leaders Act, and there's the Magnitsky Act. Several acts are involved, and the UN Act as well. So essentially, this bill would make everything quite uniform and coherent. We can thus target foreign delinquents, criminals, those who are targeted by sanctions. We can also target those who have usurped or taken for themselves the economic wealth of their countries, then try to come to Canada to lead a nice, peaceful life. We've seen too many cases throughout history of war criminals who have committed atrocious crimes, and then all of a sudden you find them in some country in the south when they're 89 years old, and you find out that they've spent their older years having a drink by the pool despite having committed atrocities, having led to suffering, having contributed to suffering, deaths, rape. So we need to take action against people like that. This brings up many questions, though, Mr. Speaker. My Conservative colleague asked a good question just before me. He said, why is this happening now on December 12th? I don't know if anyone will vote against this. Anyone has the right to, but I think this will be carried unanimously. I think we can fast-track this and then move on to other legislation. But the question is, why did it take over 2 months for this to be before the House? Because we have some of these individuals having a pleasant time in Canada, meanwhile, during these past 2 months. There are individuals who are sanctioned, who are enjoying Canadian quality of life, Canadian health care, Quebec health care and quality of life, and with total impunity. I have trouble understanding that. You know, when it comes to the Magnitsky Act, these are people who have suffered torture, mistreatment. For example, Eugenia Kara-Mirza. I had the privilege of meeting her at the Human Rights Committee a few months ago. She stands up tall, full of courage, talks about her husband, and she says that when we talk about her husband is currently imprisoned in Russia by people who have already poisoned him twice. So let's take a moment here and imagine being in that situation. She is visiting Western countries, trying to talk about her husband as much as possible in the hopes of being able to save his life, Mr. Speaker. How can we let people like that, who poison dissenters, who throw them behind bars, and it's not justified, who act out against political prisoners and mistreat them. How can we allow people like that to come to Canada and lead a nice life? We can't allow it. So that's why I think we will have unanimous support for this in the House, Mr. Speaker. These specific grounds will be added to grounds like being criminals. There are also health reasons, false declarations, flouting the IRPA, and inadmissibility for other reasons. So this bill completes the list. This bill also includes inadmissibility for individuals who are members of non-state organizations, like terrorist groups. Now, a brief aside about that. We can identify terrorist groups. There are some groups that we would like added to the list of recognized groups, which aren't yet, and we're working on it. We would like to target terrorist groups, apply certain sanctions, and then remove certain rights from those individuals. So we can do that. Why then are we not able to establish a registry of criminal organizations in firearms control? I don't understand that. I don't. And I hope all of us here will be spared from getting some of the viruses and flus that are going around. I've been following what's going on here, and I'm very proud of my Bloc colleagues who have handled the repercussions of the firearms crisis as a result of government's actions. And my Bloc colleagues have met with specialists, and thank goodness that there is a party working hard and working seriously on this issue, and that's the Bloc Québécois. Thank goodness. Because I was watching the situation, and I thought it was really sad and poorly handled, but the Bloc handles it well. People from terrorist groups will be inadmissible from visiting Canada, from coming to Canada. That's great. We won't be doing any favors for them. So why are we doing favors for known members of criminal groups? I don't get it. This isn't about democracy. This is about firearms trafficking, firearms control. My colleague, the member for Rivière-du-Nord, I almost named him because I couldn't remember his riding, but I didn't name his name. Good for me, Mr. Speaker. So my colleague, the member for Rivière-du-Nord, has a bill about this. It's a brilliant bill, and I hope that the government will take inspiration from it on a similar model as this bill. We shouldn't give any opportunities to criminals. We should not be giving opportunities to those who have caused suffering to others. So this bill, it goes without saying that it should be supported. The Bloc Québécois feels that Canada and Quebec should be a safe haven for those fleeing war, not a safe haven for those who have caused war, not a safe haven for those who have wrought suffering upon those in their nation. Canada should not be a haven for thieves, scammers, criminals, profiteers. I urge everyone to vote in favor of this, and quickly. I believe I have about a minute left. There's a concern that I would like to raise so that we can pay extra attention to this. My NDP colleague asked a good question earlier about giving Parliament an oversight right for this bill. I think that's very good, but I'm worried about these people, like oligarchs. They have money, they can pay for lawyers, and they can pay for appeals. They have the means. So how? So I wonder whether they have the means to say that being removed from Canada is not justified so that they can continue to stay here. Meanwhile, those who they cause suffering for are still dead or imprisoned in their country. So if colleagues have any suggestions about that, I'm all ears. Thank you. Questions and comments?
Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I look at the very principles of the legislation, and it's encouraging, whether it's the former Conservative Speaker or the member across the way, that it would appear as if there is once again legislation legislation before the House where there's unanimous support of the legislation. And we see that as a good thing when you take into consideration Canada's leadership role on the global scene in regards to the issue of human rights. And this does deal with it in a very direct fashion. Canada, I believe, does play an important role. And when we take a look at what's taking place, for example, in countries like Iran and the war in Ukraine, it sends a very strong message. And I'm wondering if my colleague could provide his thoughts in regards to having the type of support that we're seeing and witnessing today, recognizing that the need to reflect our refugee policy or just immigration in general, where those that have caused harm abroad or have violated human rights do not have a place through immigration to Canada.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Well, for once, we can agree. So we can tell that the holidays are upon us. It's so nice for me to be in agreement with the Parliamentary Secretary. That's exactly why this bill is so obviously deserving of support and unanimity. But our issue is, how did it take so long for this bill to be before the House? Maybe the member understands the inner workings of the government better than we do. But we just don't understand how this took so long. Of course, we need to vote in favor of this, and we need to hurry up and do it quickly, because war criminals, those who have caused suffering to the whole population of their country, they don't deserve to have a nice, pleasant life in Quebec or in Canada while their fellow citizens of their countries are still suffering. It is incumbent upon us to be coherent and to ensure uniformity among all of our other sanctions and acts in this matter. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Meadows Maple Ridge. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for Berthier-Masquinongé for his speech. We are unanimous. All parties support this bill. What I see, though, is a lack of seriousness from the Liberal Party. Why did it have to take strikes and protests by thousands and thousands of Iranians for the Liberal government to say, oh, well, maybe it's time for us to show that we take the situation seriously. So let's table this bill now, finally. Does the member agree that this is really just for the Liberal government? It doesn't seem to be a priority for them. It seems to be rather politically motivated. Is this bill being brought forward for political reasons? The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. I thank my colleague. I thank him for his question. Asked in an excellent French. Unfortunately, I rather agree, and I often agree with that observation. But this bill is necessary and urgently so we will support it with the good faith that we operate with in this House all the time, because we're always here constructively to improve things. The colleague, though, is right to say that the government is not always politically coherent and that it took them way too long. I mentioned a parallel with firearms and how unserious it was, how the Liberals have handled that. So, observers watching from the outside just wonder about the fact that it doesn't really make sense and it's not coherent. So I hope that the voters will remember these things. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague who I enjoy sitting on the Agriculture Committee with. I think there is general agreement in the House that what's in this bill is important and there is a desire to get it to committee. But I would like to ask him and the Bloc Québécois thoughts on what is missing in the bill and what could be worked on at committee. For example, this bill does not fix the lack of parliamentary oversight. This bill does not fix the clarity issues, why some names are added to the sanctions list and some aren't, and for what reasons. I'm just wondering if he could offer some thoughts on those two key missing pieces that could have been in this bill and how that might inform committee work at the next stage. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I feel the same way about my colleague. I enjoy working with him on the Agriculture and Agri-Food Committee. And as usual, he has made a very relevant and important comment. So yes, I do agree that we should study in committee this option of having parliamentary oversight. We also need to be careful about how this is implemented and how this goes over the next few months. This is an important question, and I also raised a very important issue earlier, the concern that I have about legal challenges made by those who have the means to pay for legal challenges and claims. So we need to study these issues in committee. Thank you. Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Shefford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a challenge to rise to speak right after the member for Berthier-Masquinongé. I'm happy to see him today. And I wish him health and wellness for the new year. Mr. Speaker, I've been listening carefully to debate today, and it reminds me of this expression, we can't be against apple pie. Maybe we need a more holiday-specific expression, like we can't be against Christmas cookies or Christmas trees. So it's great that we all agree on this here at holiday time, because often the government tables legislation that is bungled or botched or insufficiently studied. And often there's another party in the House that obstructs and delays just for the sake of obstructing and delaying. So sometimes I feel like our party, like we're the only adults in the room, Mr. Speaker. So this bill is logical, it's reasonable, and it needs to be supported. So I rise today to speak to the bill to amend the IRPA to, among other things, reorganize the existing provisions on inadmissibility for sanctions to establish a separate ground of inadmissibility for sanctions. So it would expand the scope of inadmissibility for sanctions to include sanctions imposed not only against a country, but also against an entity or a person. This bill would also expand the scope of sanctions-based inadmissibility to include all orders and regulations made under Section 4 of the Special Economic Measures Act, giving it even more teeth. It also makes consequential amendments to the Citizenship Act and the Emergencies Act. Finally, it amends the IRP regulations to, among other things, provide the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, instead of the Immigration Division, to have the authority to make removal orders on the basis of inadmissibility for sanctions under the new paragraph 35(1)A of the IRPA. In my speech, I will provide some information on the bill and then discuss various points of view, and finally, some gaps that need to be filled, and I will speak quickly. First, as an explanation, the bill that passed the Senate updates the Immigration and Refugee Act to mark as inadmissible individuals and their immediate families who are subject to sanctions such as those imposed on companies or individuals in the wake of Russia's aggression since the illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. So this is the background for this bill and the context. The amendment to the law was called for in Recommendation 13 of the 2017 report of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development on the implementation of Canada's sanction regimes, the Sergei Magnitsky report. Sergei Magnitsky was a Russian lawyer who died in a Russian prison under murky circumstances after exposing the corruption of Russian oligarchs. His death has given rise in Canada, but also in the United States, to sanction regimes, the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Leaders Act, or the Sergei Magnitsky Act of 2017. And, Mr. Speaker, a brief aside here, because in 2022, I would like us to think about journalists who died under suspicious circumstances in Qatar after reporting and trying to defend LGBTQ rights. That's very worrisome, Mr. Speaker, and I hope this bill will be a first step which will contribute to shedding some light on issues, or at least sending a clear message that this is unacceptable in 2022. The implementation of this recommendation became a priority last spring in the wake of the invasion of Ukraine. Thus, As my colleague for Berthier-Masquinanger said, that inadmissibility on the grounds of sanctions is added to already established grounds: security, human or international rights violations, criminality, organized criminal activity, health grounds, financial grounds, misrepresentation, non-compliance with conditions stipulated in the IRPA, and family inadmissibility. So there are a lot of positive measures here. In addition, the bill allows for the inclusion in its inadmissibility of individuals who would be members of a non-state organization such as terrorist groups. So as we said, we find this aspect positive as well. This bill is expected to pass unanimously as it did in the Senate. We can see this in debate today because, after all, the bill simply makes the immigration law consistent with the economic sanctions that Canada is taking against bellicose countries.
On l'a vu le 17 mai dernier, le ministre de la Sécurité publique.
As we saw recently, the Liberal Minister of Public Safety had it go through the Senate, announced the bill, and it went through the Senate before reaching the Commons, and it appears that the Conservatives, the NDP, will support the bill. So that's a good thing, as it's the end of the session. Senator MacDonald, in his Senate speech on the bill, said that he recognizes that there is a body of jurisprudence that allows literally anyone to make a refugee claim at a Canadian port of entry, and I'm concerned that this will be abused by some who will find their way into the country through this loophole. Such individuals could then exploit the slowness of our justice system to stay in Canada for a long time, and some may have the financial means to do so. So here in the Bloc Québécois, we supported sanctions against Russia's unjustified invasion of Ukraine, and we think that the people targeted by these sanctions should be inadmissible, given that Quebecers and Canadians want, of course, Quebec and Canada to remain a land of welcome for people fleeing war, corruption, and persecution, but not a haven for criminals. In my riding, in Granby, many refugees are welcomed, and we care about this. So yes, we want to be a place where people who are fleeing oppression to be able to come here, but not people who violate human rights. And so the Bloc Québécois will support Bill C-224 with this in mind. And it is quite clear that Russia committed crimes of war during the invasion: torture, execution, sexual violence, and that this toll could rise. Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, the Bloc Québécois has moved various initiatives that have later been approved by the government, like, for example, removing biometric data requirements for certain categories of people, chartering flights. We have brought forth some concrete ideas to accelerate the reception of refugees, and we really need to see how in cases like that we can take action in order to constructively welcome people. I'd also like to say that we need to update the Immigration Act to ensure that it's consistent with our sanction regime. Bill S-8 will update the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act so that various sanction regimes are added to existing grounds. And we've got to remember that the current bill goes hand in hand with various sanctions that have been adopted under the special economic measures for Ukraine. Under CIMA, a regulation that has been amended more than 40 times since the illegal invasion of Crimea by Russia in 2014 and its invasion of Ukraine in February 2021. If S-8 were to be adopted, various sanctions regimes such as those under the United Nations Act, the CIMA or NATO might apply, and Bill S-8 would allow a border officer to turn back at the border an individual who is subject to a sanction upon their arrival. That would simplify the deportation process, and in addition, the bill would correct gaps in the law to ensure that Canada respects the right to asylum, since S-8 ensures that Canada's international obligations are met. Indeed, an individual subject to a sanctions regime could claim asylum, but would be unable to receive permanent resident status as long as they are subject to a sanctions regime. So S8 corrects the loopholes introduced by the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act, which prohibited individuals subject to a sanction regime from making a refugee claim. This correction is in line with the Refugee Convention, which states that only a final conviction for a particularly serious crime, which constitutes a threat to the community of that country, is sufficient grounds for expulsion. And so, in conclusion, I would just like to say, we've been talking about how people are welcomed into Canada. That, as I said earlier, in Granby, a lot has been done with a great deal of solidarity, and I would just like to raise the hard work of Solidarité Ethnique Régionale de la Yamaska, which is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. It's doing remarkable work. As its slogan says, our home is also your home, and I'd just like to end on that brighter note by congratulating the people who work in that excellent organization. Thank you. Questions and comments?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member might be aware of back in 2017, actually, we had a standing committee through Foreign Affairs that came up with a number of recommendations that are in fact reflected in the legislation as brought forward, fortunately, through the Senate. We know we have a fairly substantial piece of legislative agenda, especially going towards the end of the year. Everyone seems to be very supportive of the legislation. As I say, it's already been before a standing committee indirectly, and I'm wondering if the member would not agree that it would be a wonderful thing to do is to pass or attempt to get this legislation into the committee stage before we break at the end of the week.
L'Honorable Deputy de Shefford.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. We want this to be able to go forward. My colleague spoke about a 2017 report from the Foreign Affairs Committee, but it's now 2022. And he said that it's due to the Senate that this has been brought forward again. It's quite strange that it's not the government itself that's doing that. It's quite surprising. That means we've been waiting 5 years for this to be dealt with. And yet, this is something that's supposed to be a consensus. We don't want people who have committed heinous crimes to be coming into Canada. I think this is very unfortunate, and I think that things should move a lot faster in future.
Questions and comments? Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I wouldn't want to take anything away from members of Parliament and their efforts on this particular project. As it pointed out, members from all political entities came to Foreign Affairs recognizing the issue, and ultimately, we did have a pandemic. I'm sure the member will recall not that long ago, and I'm sure that had a bit of an impact, and it was more than just 2 years, the pandemic. You also have to deal with today's current and the huge number of pieces of legislation that were brought forward. It doesn't mean that the government didn't prioritize. The Senate often brings forward legislation that is a priority for the House of Commons itself. And the point is, and what I would hope, is recognizing that whether it's the Senate or the House of Commons, there seems to be a great deal of political will. I would suggest that the timing is right. We have seen this year, Mr. Speaker, the war taking place in Europe. We're seeing human rights violations in Iran, that this is a good piece of legislation, which is a good reflection of the time for Canada to send a strong message. Would she not agree?
Before we go to that, I appreciate the member immensely in this chamber, but I'm going to identify myself as a he, him once again. He says madam again. I don't know why, but I try. Anyway, question, come on. L'Honorable Député de Shefford.
The Honourable Member for Shefford. Well, I'd like to thank my colleague. But still, 2017 was before the pandemic. It's true that things have changed, and what we've seen this year have made this more urgent. What we do about these criminals, I just hope that we're able to work together to speed this up, because recommendations come from well before the pandemic, and things need to be done much more quickly. we need to ensure that the committee can follow up and to ensure that this legislation is implemented. Because voting on a bill is one thing, but ensuring that it's applied is something else. And we also need to consider how this bill will affect people. We need to be able to move forward, make certain corrections. Perhaps there might be gaps. And I hope that that's what the future of this bill holds.
Comments, just a quick one. The honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I just wanted to get the member to comment on the fact that this House requested the government enlist the IRGC as a terrorist organization. It hasn't done so. We get a bill like this that comes through, and it just seems to be a bit of a distraction from the fact that they have not followed through with the will of Parliament. So I'm just wondering if the member has any comments on that.
L'honorable député de Shefford.
The honourable member for Shefford. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. I would just like to remind him that I was the member who tabled the motion to support Iranian women. And when I've gone to protests with Iranian women, I've considered that it's really two separate things. The bill, and then we need to consider how people will be affected by this. And also we need to consider how we respond to the Iranian regime and all the details of that. These are very key issues. Because we're talking about a struggle that will not be done for a long time, and we need to show solidarity for the Iranian people that is fighting for justice, especially for women.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is nice to see you today in the House. You look very manly this afternoon. Of course, it is my great honor always to stand in this place and to speak on behalf of the residents and the constituents of Edmonton Strathcona, and I am particularly delighted to be standing today and speaking about our sanction regime and the work that needs to be done to strengthen and ensure that our sanction regime is as adequate and as strong as it can be. Because, of course, we know that sanctions are one of the tools that we have to hold governments, to hold individuals around the world to the rule of law, to human rights, to democracy and fairness and justice for their citizens. It is one of the tools that we have. And I know for a very long time, many members in this place have worked very hard, very well together to try to increase our sanction regime effectiveness, to increase the ability of sanctions to do what we hope that they will do, and that is to change the course of governments and individuals, change their behavior, punish them for their harms that they've caused, without harming and punishing innocent people, without hurting and harming innocent citizens. The act that we're debating today is S8, and of course this is an act to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, and to make consequential amendments to other acts and to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations. Now, I have to say that this proposed legislation amends the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, or the IRPA, and it will provide Canada with much-needed abilities to better link government sanctions with authorities related to immigration enforcement. And I think we can all agree that this means that not only will foreign nationals sanctioned due to the invasion of Ukraine be inadmissible to Canada, but it will also stop all previously sanctioned individuals from places like Iran, Myanmar, Burma, South Sudan, Syria, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe, amongst others. And I am very supportive of this bill. I think the NDP is very supportive of this bill. But we do need to consider, and most of my comments today will be on the fact that this is only a small piece of what needs to be done to strengthen Canada's sanctions regime. This bill does not fix some of the things that we have been calling for some time. For example, the absence of parliamentary oversight. We have very little parliamentary oversight of our sanctions regime, and I'll certainly be speaking to that a little bit later. This also does not fix the enforcement in areas that are not immigration related. For example, the seizure of assets. Again, I'll speak to this in more depth later on, but I would just raise again in this House that to date, about $121 million have been seized from Russian oligarchs as part of our sanctions regime to force Russia to stop its illegal war in Ukraine. $121 million is an awful lot to me, and it's probably an awful lot to most of us in this room and in this country. It is not an awful lot for Russian oligarchs. And it also does not fix the challenge that we have as parliamentarians with clarity. So we still don't have a good system in this place that will explain why the government chooses to add some people to the list to be sanctioned, how those decisions are made, how the timing of those decisions is made. We know that we work with our allies. We know we work with other countries. That's very, very important for sanctions to be effective. But we do need to have more clarity on how those decisions are being made as parliamentarians. And I will say, as we go forward, looking at the sanction regime and strengthening the sanction regime, that there are people in this House that have been doing very, very important work on this. You know, I have to call out my colleague from the Conservative Party, the member for Selkirk, Interlake, and Eastman, for his excellent work on the Magnitsky sanctions. Please do pass that along. I can tell myself. Also, our Deputy Prime Minister, who has done great work on making sure that the Magnitsky Act was put in place. Of course, the challenge of that is, as some people have mentioned before, my colleague from the Bloc mentioned just previously, is that putting something in place, putting a law in place, doesn't actually matter if we are not enforcing it, or if we are not making sure that it is adequately applied. A perfect example of that is that with the Magnitsky sanctions, we are supposed to do a 5-year review. Well, 5 years is 2022, and there is some review being done at the Senate, but we have not done any review within the Foreign Affairs Committee. We have not done any review within this Parliament. So for me, that is a challenge that we have. Now, I spoke briefly about the need to strengthen our sanctions regime. And, just give me 1 second, Minister. Mr. Speaker. And for years, the NDP have been pushing for a stronger sanctions regime. And we're happy to see some of the important changes that this bill will bring forward. Things that we've asked for years, for several years, including in the 2017 Foreign Affairs Committee study on Canada's sanction regime. Many of the recommendations from that study have not been implemented, and we look forward to the government moving somewhat faster than they have to date to make sure that those are implemented, especially considering that right now what we are seeing in Ukraine is a vital need for sanctions to be a key piece of our response to the Ukrainian war. Another example of why our sanctions regime has not been as effective as it could be is things like the waiver. You know, we did see the government in the summer, in the middle of July, put a waiver in place that would cancel some of the important sanctions that we had put in place that we had against Russia. Now, I'm not going to stand here and pretend that wouldn't have been a very difficult decision for this government to make. You know, we had allies with our German allies and allies with our Ukrainian allies that were asking for different things, and that's a very difficult situation to be in. So while I did not agree with the decision that was made by the government, I do accept that was a difficult decision to make. That said, since then, Mr. Speaker, that pipeline that the waiver was supporting, first of all, was supporting a piece of equipment that was returned to Germany to be returned to Russia. Russia didn't ever pick it up. The second thing is that the pipeline that it was meant to be used on has now since been blown up. So there is really no reason whatsoever for us to still have this waiver in place, to still have this lessening of our sanctions against Russia, but yet we still do. We still have not, the government of Canada has still not cancelled the waiver, which is appalling and something that they should be doing immediately. And I know certainly the Foreign Affairs Committee will be recommending that if we can get out of the filibuster that's been put in place by some of our colleagues within the Conservative Party. The other piece that I want to know about with regards to our sanctions regime is how we can double check that what's happening is adequate and it is being done properly. So I talked a little bit about sanctions oversight. We know that after Russia invaded Ukraine in February, that there were sanctions that were put in place. But we also know that those sanctions trickled out after months and months and months. And for many of the oligarchs, they had the opportunity. We learned that they had the opportunity to actually remove their assets from Canada, to move their assets so that they would not be able to have those assets seized. So that's a missed opportunity when those assets were supposed to go to help rebuild Ukraine, to help with the Ukrainian rebuilding initiatives. We also know that the government has failed to provide that clarity on sanctions that we very much hoped for. For example, multiple times I have asked in this House, but I have also asked using order paper questions to get more information, more details on who is being sanctioned, what is being sanctioned, what has been seized, how it's being seized, what processes are being used. And in fact, I've never been able to get an adequate answer from the government. In fact, one of the order paper questions was returned to me with, and I'm not joking, with the response that said, we aren't 100% sure that we will be able to give you accurate information, so we're going to provide you with no information at all. Interesting tactic. I'd love to see somebody try it in high school or in their university courses. Because I'm not sure I'm giving you all of the information, I'll give you none at all. So that's something that we have some problems with. We still don't have that level of clarity. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have another concern as well. When the government introduced the Budget Implementation Act, the last Budget Implementation Act, there was a change to the way that sanctions were dealt with. So in the past, there was this parliamentary oversight because the government needed to record the use of the sanctions regime or the Sanctions Act. They needed to report that to Parliament. That needed to be tabled with Parliament. In the Budget Implementation Act, that requirement was removed. So now it's no longer the government's obligation to tell the Parliament what those sanctions are, what's been seized. Sure. So we could find out if we took the government to court, if we used a judicial remedy for that, but we can't find out through just parliamentary processes. And this is taking away the right of all parliamentarians to have that transparency, have that understanding of how our sanctions are being chosen, how they're being enforced, if they're working. Because, Mr. Speaker, I have to say, a sanction isn't really that useful if it's not being enforced. You know, a sanction isn't really all that important if countries understand or if individuals understand that it won't be enforced in Canada. You know, I have to tell you, there's an interesting thing that I found out as I was doing some of the digging around sanctions. Do you know if you want to find out what goods are coming into Canada from Russia, you can find that out by looking at Russian shipping records. You can't find that out by looking at Canadian shipping records. It's very interesting to me that there is transparency that you can find in the US, the UK, the EU, Russia, but you cannot in fact find here. So that for me is also another challenge I have with our sanction regime. Now, as I said at the beginning, this particular bill does help with some aspects of our sanction regime, and I am very happy to support this legislation. I am very happy to see that it will be fixing some of those holes around our sanction regime. But I will say that this seems very much to me like tinkering around the edges. You know, we have heard from the Senate, one of the key quotations from the Senate hearings on Bill S8 from Canada's foremost expert on sanctions policy, Andrea Charon, was, and I quote, "Well, there's nothing wrong with highlighting in the Immigration and Refugee Act that inadmissibility due to sanctions is possible. This repeats a pattern whereby Canada tinkers on the margins of legislation without addressing core policy and process issues. If we are to continue to sanction autonomously with allies, we need to fix fundamental issues of policy and fundamental issues of process." So, Mr. Speaker, I believe going forward that we have many things that we still need to do. We need to have a comprehensive review of Canada's sanction regime. The NDP has proposed a study at the Foreign Affairs Committee on Canada's sanction regime. We are very hopeful that that study was meant to have taken place this fall, during the fall session. We are very hopeful that it'll take place very, very quickly once the winter session begins. Again, I would urge my colleagues within the Conservative Party to stop filibustering our committee so that we, in fact, can get on with the very important work of foreign affairs. We can ensure that our sanctions are being more effectively applied. We can bring forward legislation that would align with the recommendations in the 2017 Foreign Affairs Committee report that calls for greater transparency, calls for a review of our sanctions regime, and calls for a parliamentary body of all parties that would actually assist in identifying which names and which individuals should be on the Magnitsky list and should be sanctioned by the Government of Canada. Because, Mr. Speaker, one of our biggest problems we have, and I've said it many times, is if we can't fix our sanction regime very quickly becomes not as effective and not as useful as we need it to be. And I think members of this House have brought up circumstances where that is the case. You know, we know that, for example, in Ukraine, that sanctions is one of the key tools that we have to hold Russia to account for their illegal invasion in Ukraine. It's one of the key levers that Canada can pull to force the Russian Federation to rethink this horrific and illegal attack on civilians. It's also one of the things that we can use when other human rights abuses are raised around the world. You know, we are seeing horrific attacks on protesters in Iran. Just this morning, I woke up to another horrific example of a protester being executed because he was fighting for his freedom. We know that there are many, many Iranians that are in grave danger right now. And if this sanction regime can be fixed and can help the people in Iran even a little bit, that has to be done. You know, I'm interested in looking at sanctioning a whole range of characters that we know around the world have been responsible for human rights abuses, for atrocious human rights abuses. What we are seeing in Yemen, what we are seeing from members of Saudi Arabia. We need to make sure that we are, as a country, standing up for human rights and using the tools that we have at our disposal for those efforts. And I also want to point out, too, well, if I could, that the sanctions regime is a tool that we also have to use for our feminist international assistance policy and for the feminist foreign policy that we certainly hope that the government tables with Parliament very, very soon. We know that the people who are identified by the Magnitsky sanctions and by the SIMA sanction measures, we know that vastly a huge percentage of those are perpetrating human rights abuses that are disproportionately impacting women and girls around the world. We know that sexual violence, gender-based violence, has been used as a tool to silence journalists, to silence human rights defenders around the world. We know that rape has been used, and this violence does not align with a country like Canada that has a feminist foreign policy, that has a feminist international assistance policy, that needs to be looking at our foreign responses through that lens. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to end my comments today. You know, as I was traveling here from Edmonton, yesterday I took some time to read some of the speeches from the Nobel Peace Prize winners. And I wanted to just read a quote from you, because the quote that I have here from Oleksandra Matvichuk from the Center for Civil Liberties, the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize winner, spoke to me about the need for sanctions and why it is so important that we work with our allies and that we work to make our sanction regime stronger. And the quote is this: "Peace, progress, and human rights are inextricably linked. A state that kills journalists, imprisons activists, or disperses peaceful demonstrations poses a threat not only to its citizens. Such a state poses a threat to the entire region and peace in the world as a whole. Therefore, the world must adequately respond to systematic violations. In political decision-making, human rights must be as important as economic benefits or security. This approach must be applied in foreign policy." Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Bravo.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? À cause que je l'ai sauté.
Because I missed her earlier, now we'll go to the honourable member for Laurentides-Labelle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We can tell it's the holiday season coming up, and I appreciate, I know the member across the way had enough time to answer the question because I am brief, but I appreciate my colleagues' testimony. I find that sad that there was no answer that was on the order paper. I find this illogical, but here's my question. When we're talking about a bill that could be very powerful, does she think that the potential for recourse to make sure there's no delays and a way to skirt the rules, does she think that it should go to committee so that the bill is very strong and we have all the necessary means to avoid such measures?
Edmonton Strathcona.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. You know, I think that there is a system in this place where we take our legislation and we take it to committee and we look at it and we examine it and we hear from experts about it. And unfortunately, the last two bills that came before the Foreign Affairs Committee were not given the due diligence. We were not allowed to do the due diligence that we were required to do. And it is the job of parliamentarians to ensure that we have the strongest legislation possible. It is not the job of parliamentarians to allow the government to bring things by at the last minute and try to rush them through. That is not the job. Our job is to look at this, hear from experts, do what we can within the constraints of our time to make sure that we are producing adequate legislation.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, I heard the member talk about openness, transparency, and accountability in terms of how such individuals would be identified. I'm wondering if she can explain how she sees that happening and why she considers that to be so important when it comes to something like this.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. You know, I think one of the ways that we could do this is to have a parliamentary group that was made up of all parties that would have the ability to scrutinize how these names are being put on our list. I think if we had members from all parties, we had the ability to work collaboratively. We were bringing in experts. There are people in the world that know this work very, very well. Bill Browder is a perfect example of this. But you know, another thing that I would say that we need to do is work with our allies and ensure that we are working with like-minded democracies and that our lists are aligning with lists that we have with our allies.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for Peace River Westlock.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member for her speech. Back in 2018, this House called for the government to recognize the IRGC as a terrorist organization. I'm just wondering what the honourable member has to say about the fact that they haven't done that and why the NDP continues to support this government in the face of their disregarding of the actions of this place. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I raised in my comments today, we did get appalling news from Iran just this morning that more protesters are being killed by the horrific IRGC regime. And I think that everything must be done. Every possible thing must be done to hold those accountable, those that are committing these human rights atrocities accountable. And everything also must be done to ensure that no innocent person is harmed, that we are not, that we are not putting innocent people at risk as well. So every tool that we can use, I would absolutely support for holding those at the top of the IRGC accountable for their terrorist actions, their murderous actions, the horrific things that they're doing against the people of Iran.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Speaker, the member made reference to the Foreign Affairs Committee meeting, which was back in 2017. I'm not sure if she was actually a member. I didn't quite catch it if she was a member, no. But there was a report that came back to the House. So when she talks about, the process in terms of the House of Commons, I think it is important for us to note that the issue in itself, the principle of the issue, has in fact been brought to a standing committee. And it's also now now been thoroughly debated inside the other chamber. And I'm wondering if she could provide her thoughts in regards to why it is that maybe it is reasonably hopeful, or maybe we can be a little optimistic that there's a chance that we could actually get it passed before the end of the week.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
I'd like to thank my colleague. I unfortunately was not elected in 2017, so I was not part of the Foreign Committee at that time. I wasn't elected until 2019. However, I do know that my colleague Hélène Laverdière, who sat on the committee at the time, was an extremely vocal advocate for the sanction regime, and I know that she did an awful lot of work bringing forward those recommendations. And while I'm happy that the debate happened in the House, one of those recommendations is that there would be a five-year review. We are almost at the end of 5 years. So while he's interested in seeing this bill passed, and we all are, by the end of this week, we're also done our opportunity for the 5-year review for the sanction regime, and something that has not happened. So certainly I hope at the very beginning of 2023, when we all come back refreshed and full of energy, that we will be looking at our sanction regime.
Questions and comments? Question and commentaire. The honourable member for Peace River Westlock.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, and I would also just like to point out to the honourable member that the NDP actually voted against listing the IRGC as a terrorist organization back in 2018. Has her party's position changed on that? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
I think it's very, very important, and I'll repeat myself because I have said it many times already, but I think it's very important that those members of the IRGC that are responsible for the human rights abuses against their citizens be held accountable, that they be sanctioned, that we do everything we can to ensure that they cannot come to Canada, that their assets are seized, that they are expelled from Canada. But I am very, very concerned as well about the potential for innocent people to be harmed by sanctions. We have seen that happen in Iran before, and I, for one, will do everything I can to ensure those who are guilty are held accountable, and those who are innocent do not have to pay that price.
Questions and comments? Question and commentaire. The newly married member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Opposite wanted a few things for Christmas. I know she wanted pharmacare, and I know she wanted 10 sick days, and that hasn't happened. And I know she wanted dental care for everybody that doesn't have it, and that really hasn't happened either. And yet she's forced to support a government that's raising the price of gas, groceries, and home heat. So I guess for Christmas, does she want Santa to give her a way out?
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't know because the member just arrived. I can't tell you that. Sorry. Mr. Speaker, I will just say that she maybe didn't listen to my speech and didn't have an opportunity to know that we were in fact debating S8 today. So S8 is about sanctions and our sanction regime and how to strengthen our sanction regime. Not really about my Christmas gift list, though I will say to her that absolutely dental care, pharmacare, sick days for workers, all of those things are super important to me, and I'm glad that she brought that up. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question and commentaire. The honourable member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague from Edmonton Strathcona who has done incredible work on this file. Throughout the debate today, I've heard issues raised about the lack of clarity that was missed in this bill. The fact that not enough parliamentary oversight into the sanctions regime. I'm just wondering if the honourable colleague can tell the House, will that inform her committee strategy? Does she see that there might be opportunities amongst the government and opposition sides to reach a compromise and make sure that that important aspect of parliamentary oversight is there? Because in public safety bills introduced earlier in this session, notably on C20 and on C26, I've noticed that in those bills, there was a clear lack of parliamentary oversight specified in the bill, and that will inform my strategy going forward. I'm just wondering if she can add some further comments on that. Thank you.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for the important work he has been doing in the Committee on Public Safety as well. Realistically, one of the key ways that we ensure that the legislation that we pass in this House is as strong as possible is by hearing from experts, by inviting experts that know more about the topics that we are legislating upon than perhaps some of us may know. So the idea that this has to come forward, the idea that we need to take that time and do that due diligence is very important, and it will, of course, inform my strategy. Thank you.
Well, reprise du débat.
Resuming debate.
That we only have about 1 minute. I think probably if I just stand here and speak for a little bit, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
I don't know how appropriate this is, but I would ask my colleagues if you, Mr. Speaker, could just give a moment of silence. Our colleague Jim Carr just passed away, and I think it would be an appropriate thing if we could just have a moment of silence and a prayer.
All right, we'll stand for a moment of silence for the passing of the Honourable Member Jim Carr. I thought maybe it'd be good to just pass on, of course, if people want to speak quickly to this, I think maybe we'll allow that for a few moments, but just to pass on our deepest condolences to the constituents of Winnipeg South Centre, of course, to Mr. Carr's family and friends on his passing. He was only in here last week passing his bill, so it just shows how quickly things can change in our lives, and then we lose friends and family in that way. So I know maybe the honourable member for Winnipeg North, anything quickly to add before we move on to our next. You were the closest.
Yes, well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I realize it's a very sensitive time, and there's no doubt other members that would like to be able to contribute at a more appropriate time in giving our condolences to the family and friends. We all know Jim's passion for his country. We saw that in just a speech he delivered last week. I think for now, Mr. Speaker, with the support of the House, we can either just take a quick 2-minute recess and then get back into SOs at that point, if it's deemed appropriate from yourself as the chair. Just a 2-minute recess break, just in case the House leaders want to negotiate something in between.
Is it okay to suspend for 2 minutes? All right, we'll suspend for 2 minutes.
Order.
Order. The Honourable Government House Leader is rising.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a very sad day for our parliamentary family. As has been announced to the House, our dear friend and colleague, the Honourable Jim Carr, has died. And Mr. Speaker, given that news, I move that the House do adjourn.
By unanimous consent, the House adjourns out of respect for the late Honourable Jim Carr, MP for Winnipeg South Centre. This House stands adjourned until tomorrow at 10 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1. Thank you for your attention.
Wait a second.